Operations Work Group for January 14th, 2019. First up, we have several public appearances. Pam MacGillivray is up first. You've got 3 minutes. You probably know the deal. And we'll go from there.
Good evening. Pam MacGillivray. I'm the president of Noise Mundo Inc. and also a parent of a Noise Mundo child. Here, after the feeling so good about the charter renewal here, now moving on to our next interest, which is making sure Noise Mundo Community School has a permanent home. And I know the agenda tonight is dealing with the high school facilities planning, but we just want to urge the board to keep on track with the needs for a permanent facility for our school as well. We think it's very important that we have certainty for our families, that our school is a trusted, permanent, safe fixture for our community, especially given many of our families have tenuous security given immigration policy. So again, urging you to keep the eye on the ball for the elementary school facility plans as well, and to find a permanent home on the sequencing, on the priority sequencing for Noise Mundo. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Oscar Cruz is up next. All right.
Hi guys, here again. So yeah, I'm also part of Nuestro Mundo Inc. I'm a student here at UW-Madison currently, and Nuestro Mundo alum, and the brother to two brothers who have one who went through Nuestro Mundo and one that's still in it. Also came to push for the same thing, and something that I would like to share with everybody is that when we were talking at one of our Nuestro Mundo Inc. meetings, I really related it to my own life and how I, for a long period of growing up, grew up in apartments and was moving here one year and then another year somewhere else, and then we finally got a house. And I was thinking that's a lot like what maybe students at Nuestro Mundo kind of feel like, because you just have a different mindset when you own something, when you can claim something as yours. You know, once we got to our house, we were so happy to be able to finally paint the walls the color that we wanted. We were happy because we knew that if, we wanted to fix the bathroom, we wanted to do this and that, it was going to be for our own benefit, and long term. So, my brother has talked to me. He said he doesn't really like his playground, and because it's not, the nicest, this and that. And Nuestro Mundo has been thinking about what they can do to make the playground a better place and stuff like that. But then again, it's not a permanent facility, so that always makes things a little more difficult than what they should be, I feel like. And with that, I just, would like to push for a permanent home for Nuestro Mundo, because I know that school, to a lot of kids, it feels like another extension of their own home. So if they have a permanent place, I feel like it would make it that much greater. Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar. Becky Smith.
Hi everyone, I'm Becky Smith. I'm also a member of Nuestro Mundo Inc. And I also formerly worked at Nuestro Mundo Community School. And even 5 years later, I'm still volunteering with them, so it's just a wonderful place. And that brings me here to just remind you all to keep this priority of a new building or not a new building, but a permanent building for Nuestro Mundo Community School. Such an important place, like everyone's already said. It's a community, a home for many of our students and our families. One thing I was thinking about is in the gymnasium of the school, they have all of these turtles painted on the wall. And the turtles were the mascot of the school, the Monona School. Really has nothing to do with Nuestro Mundo. It would be great if we could get our own mascot, the pumas, up there, but in a rented space, that's just not possible. So that, including the playground issue, we've got some really great outdoor experiential learning opportunities with like a rain garden and that sort of thing. But again, those are things that in a rented space you can't really keep up with so much. So a permanent facility would be really wonderful for so many reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Althea Dotson. Thanks. Sorry if I screwed up your last name.
Hello, I am Althea Dotson, and I'm a parent at Nuestro Mundo and a member of the NMI board. And I'm here to encourage you to think about the permanent facilities for the school. I am on the green team for the school, where we've worked on over the last 4 or 5 years on building a rain garden and creating outdoor learning opportunities. And as we've looked at proceeding, we've really kind of we've stopped doing new things because we're not wanting to put a lot more new plants in the ground and new big ideas that we have, because we don't know how long we'll be there and what would happen to that after we left. And so I think just another point to speak to the need for a permanent facility which would allow both outdoor spaces, but also as we look at how to improve the sustainability of the space itself, and if we wanted to put in water bottle fillers or like work on some of the energy efficiency. I think when you're looking at a space that you know you'll be in, you can look at that in a little bit more long-term way. And there's a lot of interest amongst the parents, but then we kind of continually hit on the, well, is this worth it? And oftentimes we end up not moving some of those forward because it's rented. So that all speaks to the need for a long-term permanent facility. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jeremy Piper.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Piper. Guess what? I'm also another person speaking on behalf of Nuestro Mundo. And again, just advocating for getting a permanent home for Nuestro Mundo. Nuestro Mundo has been on the forefront of innovative dual language immersion education for a long time, and there are certain things that you can do through programmatic changes and all that, but I think they've reached capacity at what they can do within their physical space, and to remain on the cutting edge and to remain leading in the language development area in Madison. They just need their own permanent space, and to also decrease their anxieties of both their staff and their families for having a place that they can continue their education for the long term.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Hacker.
Hello, I'm Chris Hacker, parent of a kindergartner at Nuestro Mundo. I'm here to advocate for the permanent home of Nuestro Mundo. I'm representing Nuestro Mundo parents, students, and staff who are dissatisfied with the state of the playground at the Maywood building. It is 20 plus years old, not up to current safety or accessibility standards or codes, and designed for 30 to 50 kids from kindergarten to second grade. Currently, the recesses are 100 kids, kindergarten through fifth grade, so we're doubling capacity. The input from Nuestro Mundo Community School community, a group of parents has identified improvements to the playground and is working to begin a capital campaign to fund the improvements with the goal of installing them at the Maywood building during the summer of 2019. With that said, the direction and timeline of the playground improvement project will be greatly impacted by the school district's plan for the future of Nuestro Mundo Community School. We're here today in support of identifying a permanent facility for the Nuestro Mundo Community School, and are greatly interested in understanding the timeline so that we can ensure any resources and funds expended to the playground improvement project are allocated in a way that would be most beneficial to the current and future students and families of Nuestro Mundo. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And then last up is Sarah Anderson.
Hello, I am not from. I am here actually advocating for the facilities. I'm here from West High School, but I would advocate for all of the high schools. And I'd like to concentrate on the pools and the extremely poor condition all of the pools are in. I have a junior, freshman, and 7th grader who have all done swimming, and now one that obviously is at West Swimming. The junior is a diver and would have to dive at Middleton High School because we don't have any diving boards in the city of Madison. And there's been days, well, 4 kids on the West High School swim team, 2 were actually diagnosed with mono, and 2 other ones had severe, close to mono symptoms and all of that because of the poor air quality and conditions in that pool. Swim at East and La Follette also for club swimming, and it is the same thing. You have to leave La Follette for a little while and come back in order to be able to breathe clearly because of the poor conditions of the pools. And I think in the facilities plan that I have just got today and was able to read over, a renovation isn't gonna cut it. I mean, we're gonna put $2 million into the West Pool. We're gonna upgrade some of our interior systems, but I mean, we have tiles falling off the wall while kids are swimming. You can hear it when they're swimming the 500 because it's a long race. And so MSCR clubs, we have, our swim team does one with some other groups that we voluntarily teach lessons to, and I think the community in general could use some really good pools, and I think facilities are important to our high schools, so that's it.
Thank you. All right, that marks the end of our public comment for tonight. We have 2 batches of minutes to approve this evening. So I guess first up, a motion to approve the minutes dated July 16th, 2018.
Second.
All right, Imad, your advisory vote?
Aye.
Others? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes 7-0. And then the motion to approve, oh, sorry, thank you, Dean, 6-0. The motion to approve the minutes dated August 13th, 2018. Imad, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes 6-0. Which brings us to one of our 2 main events for the evening, which I'm really excited to talk about, which is our long-range facilities plan in particular for our high schools. So, Chad and team, Kelly, etc.
Mike, you're invited to join the team too.
Guest appearance.
Yeah, guest appearance. Chad's going to introduce the team, but while everyone's getting settled, I'll just say a quick few words on this. I'm really excited about this presentation too. It will be one of many in the months to come as we approach decision making this summer, where we'll solidify our short-term facilities plan, and then you look at the timeline a little bit later in this presentation, but later on there'll be some decision making about whether or not we want to move forward and put something on the ballot for the voters. I wanted to remind the board that one major lever in our new strategic framework is about long-term planning. This is what we're doing now. The board plays a critical role in long-term planning, so we're excited to be in this conversation with you. Our staff has done some very solid work on this so far. What we're mainly looking for tonight, in addition to your input and feedback and reactions, is permission to continue to move forward. As you know, the deep dive will be on high schools tonight, which we think is essential for this facilities plan, but that's mainly what we're looking for, permission to move forward. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chad. We'll dive in.
Thanks, Kate, for that enthusiastic introduction. It is good to be here. Brief introduction just to make sure everybody knows, as a reminder who's on the team. So we've got Andrew Statz, who primarily helps us with the research boundary, enrollment, and capacity. Kelly, who's our semi-new Chief Financial Officer. And we welcome back with open arms Mike Berry, who Mike helped shepherd us through the last referendum, which was primarily accessibility and some capacity issues. We've printed off kind of an executive finalized summary that we feel like that is 99.9% in the can. There's still a few outstanding issues we're working on with contractors, but we were proud of that past work and welcome Mike back, both on the financial perspective and also the facilities. And it's good to have him on the team. So a brief outline of where we want to go tonight. 5 main bullets. One is just reconnect with all of you in terms of where we've been and where we're going. 2, what we're going to call a SWOT analysis, and Mike will actually work us through that. It's where we believe we're positioned relative to all this work, all good and bad. A reminder of the work streams we have going on, and there's plenty, including the Waste Remundo, that all lands on that list. We've got a lot, kind of a lot in the air that we think we can prioritize, some short-term and some long-term goals. We have the meat and potatoes of tonight's presentation is the high school assessment, and we've got some at least initial proposals around needs and some initial ideas on direction that these projects could potentially head. And then we've added one quick slide at the end to see if there's any final questions relative to a potential land purchase on the west side.
And maybe just as a point, I think we'll get through your whole presentation before questions. We'll pause before that last land acquisition one and do that separately. So just
perfect. That's what
so everyone knows.
Too. Okay, so just a refresher here. We've got a rather long web link at the top of this slide, and this is a place that we're at, for the time being, is a resource, a fact-based resource that, quite frankly, didn't even exist a few years ago until we got this work group off the ground, and is a place that we continue to drop anything related to facilities or long-range planning for the district. The reports I'll share with you tonight will end up on this resource, and we will continue to fill it. We will continue to have you guys help us, give us some guidance in terms of what needs to be there and where things need to go, but wanted to call your attention to that. Second, just the quote on the left, and primarily that last sentence. But in a nutshell, it's really important to do this work, and we are borderline negligent if we forget about it, and our facilities will show it in a hurry. And neglecting those capital needs can contribute to higher costs in the future. In my opinion, in my current role, I think we're already starting to see some of that, where we are fixing things that probably should have been replaced, in some cases decades ago, but we, for one reason or another, have decided that capital maintenance, in particular at our high schools, hasn't been a priority, and we're hoping to get a little energy behind that tonight. As a reminder, these plans are the backbone of everything we're doing, the strategic framework and the layers of all of our instructional plans underneath, and in my mind, facilities and that instruction go hand in hand. And we're excited that these projects have the potential of really lifting up and supporting instruction happening in our schools. I'd certainly call out the fact that we've got excellence and belonging as part of our core values, and I think facilities can be a giant piece of that. With that being said, as I mentioned, we wanted to kind of lay the foundation of where we think we are, where we're weak, and where we think we've got some opportunities. We were going to have Mike work us through that slide and a couple more.
Okay, I might need a few warm-up pitches here before I get going. But anyway, thank you, Chad. And I received an awful lot of help from my SLT colleagues here over the years, so it's nice to be able to return the favor. We were working on building the factual data to support a study of capital planning and facility reinvestment. The condition of the current schools, the condition of our balance sheet, our amortization schedules, enrollment projections. And that's all part of that slide that Chad already showed you. It's on the website. But from that work, a picture started to emerge, and we wanted to capture that, and we did it in the form of a SWOT analysis. There's other ways to present this, but we thought this kind of captured it reasonably well. This is the team's SWOT analysis. The board would, if you had your own exercise, you might come up with different content. But I think there's a lot here that would be generally agreed upon. So let me walk you through it. And I don't want to read every single bullet point. I just want to try to get the main themes across. And I'll start with the weaknesses or the needs, because this has been acknowledged in previous presentations by our committee. We know that the existing schools average 55 years of age. And with that, obviously, there's a lot of deferred maintenance. We know that we are lacking neighborhood elementary schools in some key areas, or will be as the community grows. And we have capacity issues. West, Memorial are good examples. You could say Hamilton, there's others as well. The alternative programs need a long-term facility solution. You could also include here Nuestro Mundo needing a long-term solution. And that was before the turtle issue came up, so which makes it even more urgent, in my opinion. The small schools that we have, in some cases, have underutilized spaces, which can either be inefficient, in terms of every dollar counting, or it represents a missed opportunity. And then lastly, the specialized spaces. This is a nod to the instructional side of things, really dated STEAM or STEM and so on. The constraints, we'd love to act on all of these, but there are constraints. You know that, obviously. The first one that comes to mind typically, I think it's the second bullet there, just the operational and capital needs on the taxpayers and on the tax base. What can you do and in what increments? And then market share pressure on the enrollment forecast. What that means is we need to be confident in our enrollment projections, understand the complexity of that, and what that means for facility planning. It's a Rorschach test. When you look at enrollment and you're not sure about it, does that make you recede from capital planning, or does it make you accelerate it? It's really interesting, and that's, I'm sure, going to be a subject of a lot of discussion at board level for the next year. We also have school district boundary issues, a lot of growth in the city of Madison, but it's outside the school district boundary, and that creates difficulties for us as well. We are not, however, without some substantial assets with which to address this situation. And so that takes me to the left side of this sheet. The strengths, many classic school buildings, as you know, a lot of neighborhoods are named after their schools. An Elvium neighborhood, it shows you the roots, in this community. We are not really chasing surging enrollment the way the suburban districts do, which is, a blessing and a curse in that all of your capital dollars go to adding capacity. We don't have to do that. We can reinvest in existing schools. We've done some good work lately. I think the last project was a big win, especially in terms of accessibility and technology and things like that. We have really positive small school communities and favorable ratios, good learning environments, and we have a good team here. Chad and his team over at FLOM and Kelly working on the financials. I think there's enough capacity here to do this work. And lastly, the opportunities, and there has to be an opportunity or else why are we here? Really strong community support for public schools generally. Last couple referendums have been very strongly supported, good financial position, and I think really maybe the most important thing on this side of the equation is the tax base. It's a strong and growing tax base, and you'll need that in order to make the tax impact of proposals like this one work, right? So that's how we see it, and from there, the question becomes, well, in addition to admiring the elegance of that SWOT analysis, what are you going to do about it? And how do you go about it? And this captures the way that this team has organized its thinking. And there's a lot here. And I should say at the beginning of this slide, there's more here than we could deal with in any one referendum and in any one 4-year period. We can't take it all on. We may be working in multiple areas at the same time, but prioritization, strategy are going to be key. Take a look at the first item on the far left, renovating our schools for 21st century teaching and learning. And of course, we're well into the 21st century at this point. I just couldn't come up with a better descriptor. We're going to talk tonight about the high schools, but we have needs across high school, middle, elementary, alternatives. Then there's the question of, well, what do you mean by renovate? Minimal, transformative, something in between? And this is not like those Saturday morning TV shows. It doesn't happen in half an hour. These renovations are expensive and they're complex. And after all, we're in school 9+ months a year. So a lot of planning. And that's just one category. And these are really not discrete, I hate that term, buckets of work, because there's interplay between these categories. The second one is reimagining and rethinking the space utilization. We have some chronic issues with over-utilization. West is often mentioned. And then underutilized. And as you know, look at some of the elementary enrollments projected for the Northeast side. What do you do about that? How do you take advantage of that space? A lot of interesting policy questions there. Stabilized program locations is the third category. I was mentioning that I did not have access to Jen's endless collection of transitive verbs. So I used stabilize, which is really, frankly, not very inspiring.
I like it.
Do you? We know that when we rent, it prohibits you from investing in the space and customizing the space, right? And it's expensive. So we want to get out early on especially the alternative programs and do that before 2020. Investing in neighborhood school sites, I've sort of mentioned this already. We have had concerns about Allied Drive and how we service it. We've had concerns that we raised about the South Alice area. We know that as the city grows, there's pressure on the fringe growth as well. So identifying that and planning for it. And then lastly, creating equitable district boundaries. And I think our goal here has to start with just raising the awareness of what those boundaries are, how they do or do not align to the city, and where that growth will occur, and what happens to it. And in a nutshell, what happens here is the city will grow on its edges. That enrollment is earmarked not for MMSD, but rather for Sun Prairie, Verona, Oregon, McFarland, right? The unfortunate next consequence of that is that your urban district becomes more and more a school of color, while the suburban schools around it become more and more schools essentially of middle-class white kids. And no one ever wrote that as a policy, but it is what happens if you don't rethink carefully how we mix these neighborhoods and communities. So there's some really interesting work there, which is why I say this is not a 2 or 3 year issue. Long-range facility planning is continuous. I think the real goal here is to start prioritizing and chunking out what you want to do when.
So Mike just did a great job of laying out the overall capital plan and a long-term strategy. We are also working on our operating budget, both a single and a multi-year strategy. Thanks, Jen. So while we're thinking about any single referendum, we're also looking at the long-term strategy around our finances, both on the operating and the capital side. Because while it's easy to think about these two things in parallel, they point to each other in very important ways, particularly as it relates to our levy and what our taxpayers can afford. We are actively working on this, our operating planning, linking into our capital planning, both in the short term and in the long term. We're working on that plan and we'll have it available to you by this summer. Just want to make sure you know that we are very well aware that these two plans have to hang together in order for this to work for the school district in the long run. There are also two other points which Chad and Mike already made, so I won't belabor them as it relates to our operating budget and our capital budget. One is mainly our maintenance budget and our operating plan. To the extent that we're not funding maintenance at the levels that we need to for roofs, boilers, parking lots, playgrounds, we start to build up a deferred maintenance over time. And that's what you'll start to see come out in Chad's talking points. These decisions made year after year after year about where we're investing starts to weigh on our capital planning process. The other part where this intersects is on our revenue. We are in a time and an environment where our parents and our students have choice. And to the extent that our facilities are not meeting 21st century expectations around the instructional programming, arts, athletics, you'll see our parents start to make choices of areas that do have them. And Chad will dive into this more lately around where all the new schools in our surrounding areas will be coming up. So it's a multi-pronged strategy in our mind. And those 3 particular points are on my mind and on this team's mind as we move forward in the planning process. The project calendar is in front of you. We're obviously here in January, specifically focusing on high schools and looking for some vision and scope from you tonight. We'll come back to the board in the early summer with some updated planning, along with the official approval of the plan per the board's facility policy in June. And in July, we'll start to talk finances. By then, we'll know more about our multi-year state budget, and we'll have some actual numbers, taxpayer impact, and levy impacts available for you. In that meeting, we'll hope to get some guidance that allows us to go out into the broader community with our plan that's in our hand at that point in time to get feedback from our families, our community members. We'll reiterate between July, December, come back to you in January for a full second kick at the plan, with the aim of the board voting in May for us to go to a November 2020 facility referendum. That's the way we're stacking up this whole timeline. And obviously in the November, then we hope we have a winning plan and can move forward on implementation. So with that, I'll pause before we move into the next part for either Chad, Mike, or I to answer any questions.
I'm just going to chime in real quick and note that it's worth knowing that in March we will be having a discussion on Capitol High, which will be both instructionally focused, but we'll touch on the facilities as well.
If it's okay, let's just keep
That's fine.
going and
Okay.
then get to the meat. Is that okay?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're good.
Just keep going, yeah.
I got my notes.
All right. I've been going to work at these high schools since 1998, where I taught science at East High School and coached football at West in my first year. Coach Ackley didn't have room for me on the East staff. His loss. At the time, I was given the key to room 327 at East High School, and I can tell you right now that room looks exactly the same as it did when I started teaching in 1998. The desks are the same. The orange cabinets are still the same. The lab sinks are still the same. The locker room that I just toured at West High School when I was coaching football hasn't changed a lick. It's just 20 years older. And that's, to me, just kind of evidence of the fact that we haven't really reinvested in these things in quite some time. The last real time we put some money into some expansion and renovation was the 70s. So I'm excited about the fact that we can hopefully do this and steer this, at least our comprehensive high schools, on the right track for the next 40 or 50 years. I don't think these things are going anywhere. They are part of the fabric of our community. They are legacy buildings that people still come back to tour almost on a daily basis. When I was the principal at Follette, you could have someone want to float back through to talk to a teacher or walk the building. These buildings mean a lot to our community. So I'm excited about some of these, at least initial proposals from a needs assessment. To walk you a little bit through the work in terms of how we got here. Over the last few months, I've assembled a team of actually two teams of architects who are with us tonight. And I want to just give them a quick shout out. They did some pretty nice work here to get us to this point. You're familiar with Plunkett Raythard, at least many of you are. So I've got Steve Kiehafer and Ken Turba, if you guys want to give a quick wave. So we broke this project into two pieces. We gave the PRA team the East Side schools, and we have two firms that are approved per the board for the next 3 years, and then we got Zimmerman Architectural Studios, and we've got Doug Barnes and Greg Strand, who are also with us, and they did the West Side schools. So you have 400 plus pages of reports that I'm going to try to summarize now in the next 10 or 15 minutes. Look forward to some of your feedback as we get through this.
You can see the "You Are Here" point on this timeline. We've had a bunch of input from mainly central office folks, Jen, and a ton of input from my team to get this project kickstarted. In my mind, this thing actually becomes real and exciting with the next phase, when we get to talk to staff and students and community members and start to get their reactions to at least our initial needs assessment and really start to curtail these project proposals to become what they need to be if we end up in 2020. As a reminder, this is really the foundation of most of these proposals. One of the many resources listed on our website is that Facilities Condition Index. I think a few of you are probably familiar with this. We've called out the high schools because that's what we're concentrating on tonight. You can see we've got essentially letter grades of D's and C's for those 4 facilities. That big dollar amount that's listed underneath their summary, their summative score there, is the deferred maintenance. The cost of the deferred maintenance would essentially take us to get back to a B. At East High School, to bring everything back up to a B, in 2017 we estimated that to be $41 million. So some significant deferred maintenance dollars. There's $154 million listed in deferred maintenance just at those 4 sites. As Mike mentioned, the average age of our sites district-wide is 55, and the average age of our high schools is actually 75 years old. We have some old facilities where we are maintaining. Wanted to just do a quick dip into enrollment. This is from Andrew's team. I think it's valuable for a couple of reasons. We don't see anything in the next 20 years that would lead us to believe that enrollment's dipping to the point that we're going to be down a high school or anything like that. In particular, I wanted to call it the west side, where it looks like Memorial will be pushing or at capacity down the road. I can tell you, even in a building, even being the principal at La Follette felt full to me when we were 1650. And we've got a capacity listed at 2,200. You could, but the building would be ridiculously tight. And in my opinion, Memorial will probably feel like that if we put a few hundred more students in there. And I think West feels like that right now, where there isn't a period that all 7 hours don't have every classroom in the place full of students and staff members. West is as tight as you can get. So I thought that was worth at least taking a snapshot in terms of where we're at and where we're going. Through these needs assessments, we ended up with 4 main categories of work. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but after we took in all of the input, both from my team in terms of deferred maintenance, and took in initial input from most of the instructional folks, we came up with 4 main categories to kind of categorize where we wanted to start to put some of the recommendations. Those would be educational spaces, building functionality, traffic flow, things like that, athletic spaces, and then deferred maintenance. I want to pause just a little bit on deferred maintenance, where you may think of things like parking lots and boilers and roof membranes, but deferred maintenance can also be things like that science lab that still looks the same. It can also be things like restrooms that in many cases are original, ceilings and lights and all the things that should go along with an updated facility. I pushed our 2 teams of architects to make sure that we didn't come tonight with just one proposal, to give us at least an idea of some range of options that would be possible at all of these sites. So we ended up breaking down the initial recommendations into 3 categories: bronze, silver, and gold, which come along with an estimated dollar figure. We certainly could have had nickel and we could have had platinum, but this was at least a place for us to start the conversation. These projects are by no means fully baked, and we'd have a long way to go before they actually got to a referendum ballot, but they're a place for us to start based on the needs assessment. As Kelly alluded to, I think this is an interesting slide. We did just a quick run around around the border of our district. All Dane County schools, and all of them have adjoining boundary lines with the Madison School District. This is a referendum summary of all of what's been passed since 2013. It's a total of $700 million in work that's happened in outlying areas. Many times can be work from expansion and increased capacity, but also in many cases you even take the Middleton project, where they will add some square footage to their building, but they're also rehabbing their entire space. So the old Middleton High School proper will also see a complete renovation, and we have leavers that are more often leaving on the boundary of our district, and I for one actually believe that facilities play a role in families making a decision on if they decide to open and roll out of Madison schools. So it also gives you a decent idea of just the cost of construction, and this stuff is not cheap when you dive into both new construction and renovation. So these are not flashy slides tonight, and I wanted to have a quick run around on a summary of what ended up in those 4 reports. And kind of just get your pulse for where we think we're at. I wanted to kind of just take us east to west through the district, give you an idea of what some initial recommendations were, and then kind of see where all of you were at, if you had feedback, and if you'd hopefully like us to continue on this work and get into the schools and really refine these projects. So we started at La Follette High School and broke this down into some tiered budgeting. Some things I want to call out on an initial kind of foundational recommendation out of the La Follette project, with about $30 million in work that would be possible. We would tackle some of those deferred maintenance needs and take on everything in the building that was kind of lowest hanging fruit. Mechanical systems would be a big piece of that. I don't want to diminish how important it is. Ahmad, I think you maybe could attest to this. It's probably not always 69.3 degrees in all of your classrooms. And in my mind, that is foundational to good instruction and would be a piece of all of these projects, upgrading our heating and cooling plant. Some of the more exciting things that could potentially happen at La Follette. I don't know how many of you are familiar with La Follette's library, which is on the 2nd floor of La Follette. Nikki, I'm looking at you. Yeah. And we've got the area underneath the Nikki called it out, the pit. So
I used to play hide and seek there when I was a kid to grab the store.
So the last renovation at La Follette, they decided they needed a new expanded LMC, and instead of putting it on the ground floor, they built it on stilts. And they ended up putting it essentially covering an open-air amphitheater that used to be a big open courtyard. And now it's kind of indoors and kind of outdoors, and they call it the pit. And it's really underutilized space. That's a supervision issue, and it's also an accessibility issue. Students heading from the A to the B wing at La Follette actually have to go outside through the pit. And we believe that there's the possibility for infill there, some new collaborative, well-lit instructional space, hopefully in line with the vision around pathways. So that's one of the things we'd be most excited about. The theater hasn't really seen a touch of work, other than we were excited about a decade ago that the hard seats got pads. Other than that, the theater hasn't had a lick of work done on it since it was built. So we'd propose a complete gut job and redo of the theater. We'd also propose some significant just deferred maintenance pushed into upgrading the classrooms. So that was a nutshell on the foundation for La Follette. Some key additional considerations if we decided to push a little harder on this, and I think these projects kind of get exponentially more exciting once we get some of that deferred maintenance stuff out of the way. We could expand the commons at La Follette, where we've got big time congestion issues, what I refer to affectionately as the hot corner at the principal at La Follette, as where most of the building would cross-sect 3 times a day during the block schedule. We'd look to potentially expand the main office and possibly centralize some of the student services areas, and the
the field house is in need of a complete redo. We would go in the direction that we're heading with East High School and expand their spectator gym to their current field house and redo it that way to add some capacity and redo the entire thing. Additionally, in the gold option is the potential of a fine arts entrance with additional practice space and the possibility of a wellness or fitness center off the back of the building. And I thought one of the more exciting possibilities at La Follette, depending on budget, would be turn their existing spectator gym into a STEAM or pathway space and retrofit it and turn it into a 21st century learning space. East High School. Kind of want to have us all of us picture ourselves at East High School right now. If it's 1920, when the building's built, you arrive on East Washington and you walk up the grand staircase to wherever the main office used to be. Now when you go to East High School, you park in a cramped 4th Street parking lot. And you attempt to find the main entrance to the building, which is, and we've got a welcome center that's about the size of this boardroom table, maybe a little smaller. And then if you are a parent or a visitor and you're asked to find Mr. Hernandez's office or a student services area, you start the maze of walking yourself through East High School. So one of our initial recommendations at East would be to make a main entrance on 4th Street, which potentially could bring some of the office staff down to the first floor to bring them down to our families, actually make a main entrance to the building, and centralize some of the things that are most important for our families. Additionally, we put a decent chunk of money into deferred maintenance in classroom spaces. Room 327 would be on the top of my list for that. And then just all these projects have some furniture, some landscaping, and so forth. Some lights.
Yeah.
Are you talking the mall, Nikki? Yeah, the mall would get a complete reboot. Yeah, without a doubt, and that comes along with deferred maintenance. Additional considerations at East, I think there's some exciting things in here as well for us to consider. If you're familiar with the music practice spaces at East High School, they're above the cafeteria right now, have low ceiling, significant heating and cooling issues. They're small for their purpose. They are not terribly close to our brand new theater. We'd look to relocate those and repurpose that space potentially for some science, technology, and so forth. So a complete refresh and flip around there. We've also included in these recommendations the possibility of completely redoing and rethinking the LMC at East High School. Right now the LMC is split by a hallway, and we have one library media specialist that has to work in 2 spaces. We'd look to potentially double the size of the library on one side and maybe build it into 2 spaces. So those are a couple of the exciting things we had at East High School, all embedded in the reports you guys have tonight. As a reminder, West, we had the Zimmerman team worked us through the West and Memorial projects. So West was built in 1930. It's had several additions since, but the original building was in 1930. As I mentioned, number one thing we have to take care of West, if we spend a nickel, is we have to find them some additional instructional space so that building can breathe. So Zimmerman's initial proposal, if you can picture this, walk yourself up the Ash Street entrance, the main entrance of the building. Off to the left, that addition is the music and the pool that kind of jets out parallel to Regent. We'd look to, and this is detailed for you guys, you can kind of see a picture of where we'd put it. We'd look to expand a 3-story addition that we'd bump up against the side of the building there, embed an elevator into the middle of it so we can have some accessibility to the music wing that currently isn't accessible. Put offices on the main floor. Right now, if you go to Karen's office, you have to duck into our kind of scabbed together welcome center, and then you have to find your way through the building to get yourself to Dr. Baran's office. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's the first thing we take on. Additionally, we take on a little bit of parking and some initial considerations for athletics, pools, and so forth. So that's kind of the bronze level recommendation for for West High School. The next level of scope potentially would be a little more infill on the inside courtyard, 2 floors of new classrooms, much more extensive renovation of the pool and athletic fields, and I'd say the theater right now, if I had to grade them, is probably second place next to East, but could certainly use, it's been a while, and their last round of renovation I think is pushing now 20 years, and that space is just once again looking dated. Some exciting potential last level recommendations at West on the gold would be get rid of the pool. Build a new pool on the current basketball court, and potentially even add parking in that area as well, maybe even on top of the pool. But I would agree we have one of the best swims teams in the state swimming in that pool every day, and it's, in my opinion, it's well below what we would what you'd build anymore. It's small, it doesn't have a diving well, and it has some significant deferred maintenance needs. So that's West. Lastly, Memorial High School. Thank you guys for hanging with me on this. Memorial High School has a decent chunk of deferred maintenance needs, as we've mentioned before. The heating and cooling plant is just a long time overdue for a complete redo. Ahmad, I see you nodding your head. It's a battle on a daily basis to keep that thing going and doing what we can to make your classrooms as comfortable as possible. We would certainly put money into the classroom in our initial proposal, but there would have to be some foundational things taken care of there. We really wouldn't get into, in my mind, anything super juicy at Memorial on our initial proposals until we start to have that dollar amount potentially creep up a little bit. We would consider a brand new fine arts edition. The initial proposal you guys will see in your Memorial packet would actually spin the theater at Memorial 90 degrees and bump out some practice space towards Gammon Road. They are as landlocked as possible. I know we've heard from parents around just the condition and the size of the fine arts wing at Memorial. So we'd have some additional space there. Complete redo of the classrooms and the science and technology area. The gold edition potentially could lead into a renovated welcome center, and Mansfield Stadium is showing its age as well. It's nearly 50 years old, and the condition of the stadium proper, the locker rooms, and I don't know how much longer, quite honestly, it has in it before we're going to have to put some money into Mansfield. So that's one of the last considerations we had. As I said, thank you for hanging with me. I don't know how many of you had a chance to preview some of this before we got here. I certainly encourage you to go through these after the paper copies I gave you tonight. I am interested in direction, feedback, comments, questions.
Yeah, Gloria, go for it.
Are you looking at safety and security as part of this process?
Yeah, you'll see. I think every single one of these proposals has welcome center and rethinking the way we're bringing folks into the building. Okay. We will have. I think we'll have a significant increase in terms of our investment in security just with the work I'm doing right now with door locks and security cameras. Mm-hmm. But Gloria, a decent example is we're going to put new door hardware on old doors at West High School. Those doors to replace could be $800 to $1,000, and that's not money that exists in my deferred maintenance budget, but those doors are full of windows. Mm-hmm. And if you built it to 21st century standards and want the safest possible classroom, every classroom at West High School would get a new door. I think that's just an example. So it's certainly much of what would come along for the ride with deferred maintenance would be security upgrades. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but and I'm just wondering, as we are looking to upgrade, change things around, that we are looking at it as, keeping the infrastructure, security part in mind as we are building. And so not just the doors and the locks, yep. But, I like the welcome center, right, that you're thinking about where that should be. but then other things as well as we are moving towards building so that we don't have to go back.
Yeah,
Right.
an example that like we're considering with the PRA team, if we put money into athletics on the north side of the building. Right now, La Follette's pretty hard to secure for an event because you've got the spectator gym right in the middle of the building, and the ability to zone off the building. So the public could come in and we could use that north end of the athletic, but we wouldn't necessarily give access to the remaining 2/3 of the building. So I think even design considerations like that to zone
Yeah.
off buildings and stuff. Yep.
Okay, great, thanks.
You bet.
TJ.
I'm going to try to go through this fast. Some of these are comments, some of these are questions. Big kind of response is that first off, unfortunately, I have to say that financially, the maintenance upgrades or the maintenance ones and the educational spaces would be my priorities, especially without having seen the financials. Which kind of and then add to that as the people from NMCS reminded us tonight that we have a whole lot of other schools that aren't even part of this, and so I guess that in relation to that, I ask that as this goes out, as you plan to bring things out to the community and even out further into our schools, that at least some versions of the financials accompany it, because beautiful new spaces without a price tag attached to them, we end up, building up expectations that we can't meet, and we also end up, soon. So I ask that the financials go out with it, as well as come back here. That too.
Yeah, that's for sure.
That too. That the financials come back to. Couple questions is that what's our current status on the gender neutral bathrooms?
What's our current stance?
Yeah, the current status on that project.
There is a gender neutral space in every site in our building, so we've worked
Good.
Through that.
That's a wonderful status.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the high schools in particular, most of them, all of our high schools have at least two, and I actually have an upcoming meeting to start design considerations for gender neutral changing areas. So that's kind of the next phase of the work.
Good,
But
good,
would certainly
good.
be baked into these projects.
I mean, I knew the work was in progress. I just didn't know it had been reached that area. So great. That's really good news. Second thing is that as we look at all this, I really want to encourage green and sustainable building. And I'm going to steal Dean's line, but Dean always talks about the green roofs, and that these be explored and the cost and savings and benefits be put out there. Mike had a list of things that needed to be stabilized. Those were actually all kind of rental things, but I want to add to the stabilized list, which is 4K spaces, or put that someplace in there, because we've got such instability about where we do 4K, and I just I think we have to integrate it centrally into our planning. These are our 4K spaces. They will be our 4K spaces. A little bit of flexibility with changing enrollments, but that's important, just as the stability that the Nuestra Mundo community talked about tonight. I think that's important. This is for later, and I see Matt. On the boundary stuff, it would be good to have kind of just a detailed list of what the terms of the different ones are. And a related issue is that, we're going to be talking about a land purchase tonight, and I wonder, in some ways we're in competition with our neighbors, but we can also be in cooperation. And in places like that if, Verona or Middleton has built a new school that's under capacity, that is near a place that is scheduled to become MMSD, perhaps that contract could be amended. And just the same way, if we are planning on building a school near our periphery and part of the land there is scheduled to be Middleton or Verona, perhaps we can share with these others to create efficiency. So I guess knowing what the terms of those are, and also kind of knowing what the recent and current buildings and capacity of our neighbors are along our edge, we are all in this together, and I think that we're all public school districts, and that we can work together. And again, we're in competition, but we're also friendly. I think and we are. We're very friendly. So I think that's something that we can do to look at efficiencies. Last thing is more parking at West. I'm curious. Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a classic place that there isn't a heck of a lot of space, and I guess that are we talking parking garages, parking ramps?
Well, we have, I have plans right now from a civil firm we just worked with to add, I think it's 34 parking spots to the north side of the building. So kind of where the bike racks are on the north side. We have initial conversations going with the city on just how we'd get them in and out. From what I've heard, Rick Hopke, who's been with the district forever, says West took a run at this 20 years ago, and there was at least some neighborhood concern that maybe stalled out the project. So I think
I can see both of those being true.
I think our front end listening, and we wouldn't want to repeat what's happening just down the road at Edgewood. It's been a rough go. So you want to work with your neighbors, and we'd have to do that. So there's spots there, and then their initial proposal on the gold standard would be, build a parking ramp.
I guess that's kind of, I would call it like, it's not a green space, it's kind of a gray space because it's muddy 2/3 of the year.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
it is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Imad.
I just had a question in preparation for kind of hearing staff and student community input for the new referendum. In 2015, what kinds of feedback did you hear that was new or different from the staff and students that was not in the original kind of central office recommendations, and how did we adjust for that? And then how can that kind of play a role in this new referendum?
I can answer that to some extent. Maybe you'll have a good memory of this, Mike, but I know we did some pretty significant surveying. We definitely incorporated the feedback. That is where the East Theater came from. That is ultimately what led us to the complete renovation of Jefferson. Those were the two major adjustments that we made, but I'm not sure if you remember more, Mike, but certainly it did make a big difference, Iman. I think it's really important.
Yeah, those were the two significant changes to the plan as it evolved, and I think that the other message we received is partially why we're here tonight, which was, okay, we'll approve or support this package of improvements, but boy, you sure need a long-range plan, and we sure hope that this 2015 effort isn't a one-off where you do a few things and you all walk away. We almost had a sort of an implied promise with the community that if you let us take care of these immediate issues, in exchange for that, we promise we will come back with long-range planning, and that's what we're following through on.
Thank you.
So, Imad, are you?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll jump in. I mean, you guys know I'm passionate about this topic, and so have been looking forward to this discussion. I feel passionately that we have to do something pretty committed with respect to our facilities, and I guess I'm kind of looking to my fellow board members here in terms of, we've got three tiers that is very clear cut, I think, and I think the team needs some guidance in terms of what tiers and where and how we want to make decisions about those tiers in order to move forward. I mean, we haven't made a major capital investment in 50 years. Our kids deserve fantastic educational spaces, and certainly our families see new buildings going up around them. They visit athletic facilities for hockey tournaments, for swim meets, for football games, for basketball tournaments, etc. And it means something, right? It means something about how we value our kids and what kind of spaces we expect our young people to grow up in for 12 years of their life and spend the majority of their time in. And I think you put it, Chad, like these are assets for our community, and they get used in the summer, they get used before school, they get used after school till 9 p.m., they get used by adult leagues, they get used by every single person in our city, and are probably the primary gathering spaces for communities in our city in a lot of ways. So look, like, I think we've got a fantastic tax base. We're lucky to be in the position we're in. It's time to reinvest in our schools. And so for me, I am incredibly comfortable. I'd like some more financial information about kind of what the per household number looks like. We're talking about $120 million at the low end just for our high schools, just to do the deferred maintenance, right? And so a little bit more than that,
Yep.
but up to $280 million, big sums of money, to do something transformative. And I'm not sure we can do that everywhere. I'd like to understand what the tax per household taxpayer commitment is. We as a district are incredibly strong financially. That said, certainly our families, our taxes in Madison are not cheap. So look, like what I want is really more of a, where is our appetite? Bronze, silver, gold, right? And if it's not the same for every school, how do we want to make those choices? Based on our values, based on the strategic framework, based on some of the capacity issues you've laid out, as well as some of the kind of other factors that play into that. So anyways, that's, I guess, maybe the big picture for me. I mean, I have a few kind of detailed comments in terms of how we think about instructional space and flexibility and whatever, but I can hold all of that. I think my main question is really for this group of people. So, Nikki.
I could answer part of it, at least for me. I'm one of those odd, weird people who likes to know everything that's going on, and everyone knows that. I'd like a vote on where people are at to know, hey, how far we want to go. I think we need to invest. I think our schools need it at the same point. I don't want to force someone out of their home, which is what I'm having friends have in Middleton, because they can't afford the referendum. And I've had several. I don't want that to be an issue. And I think for transparency, that might be the best way to do it, is to say, this is where we stand and what we're comfortable with as a group. So that way, two things happen. One, the Jen and admin know exactly where we're at, so we're not doing it last minute, which, oddly enough, I actually agree with at this one point in time. Not always. But number two is that financially we're telling the community this is where we're going to invest first. This is where we're going to invest second, and get their feedback. Hardest part I've had with everything that we've done, whether it be building long-terms or even programs, is we're going to ask the parents, we're going to ask the students, we're going to ask the teachers, and we always ask them last. I want to ask them first, because they're the ones who are using it the most.
Okay. Dean.
Yeah, thanks. Jen, do you want to comment? I got several things as well. Many of them points back up some of TJ's comments around facilities, but your team and your consultants, this is a good start here. It's a good job, gentlemen. Being on the board, and what we're asking you to do is think big picture. Being on the board, we're required to think big picture around all across the entire areas of what schools are required to do. And the facilities is one where it's kind of hard for a lot of board members to get their head around. That and school funding and budget is really difficult for a lot of us to come, because we don't, who has experience in dealing with $500 million budgets. It's a difficult thing to get your head around, and it takes a while to get it right. So there are big picture ideas here that have to also be, but also what I believe we need to consider also is how does it link with what's going on in city and district-wide issues. I've asked you and Mike to, and I've mentioned to the board where our land use in at least 10 of our schools that we're aware of, we're sitting on land which is not being used for a playground or school uses. So in a way to kind of put some things together, what we are aware of here, when someone runs for school board, they begin to look at things with a larger big picture, and we're aware of how lack of affordable housing, for example, impacts directly school achievement in so many of our students. So in these 10 properties where we have extra land available, I asked them to find me these buildings, Jen, that had the extra land, and we got 10 of them. And in some of them are large enough. I asked them to get a little bit more detail around how much square foot this extra land is available and the potential for building right on that land in land where we already own. Not only potentially building housing, but also adding facilities for potentially our 2 charters and our alternatives and 4Ks. Doing that, there's an expense to it, but there's also income. If we do housing, it's an income generator. It'll pay for itself. If we remove the rental costs for all of the two charters plus some of the alternatives, it saves income long term. Before Mike left, I asked him, what do we pay just in rents? And it's $500,000 a year, just in rents. That doesn't count utilities and maintenance and then staff allocation time to go over there and clean them up and all. So you can probably add a couple more $100,000 to that. So that's $700,000 in savings just by not having our schools in rental places. So there's an income generator that goes that saves you save income there. Now if we decide to put some housing on there, the budget developments, the development budgets that you write include an income line items for which we don't have. So that goes over long term. That's always there. How you go about doing that, there are options there. So this has to be on the table when we do that. We have to look at our facilities where we already own land and consider building right on those things. Now, either taking advantage of operating or designating some of our rental places, or consider even doing housing, which will not only be for some of our students' families to eliminate the instability there, but also entry-level professionals are being priced out of Madison. This is what we know. And we could house our staff in these opportunities. So when you talk about affordable housing, it's not always the tree lanes and the Rethkes. We're talking about our staff and other entry-level professionals who are paying more than what's recommended for monthly rent out of their personal incomes. So that's where affordable housing comes into. Anyone under 80% of median income is considered available for affordable housing. You can develop that stuff for that group. We already have staff living in affordable housing projects through Madison Development Corporation, Commonwealth, and others. So there are partners that could do this, and we could do it in several ways. So I'd like you to consider that. Now, that's not what schools do. You hear that, that's not, schools don't do, but if you look at it big picture, schools are doing this in other parts of the country already to accommodate their staff primarily, who are some in San Francisco and other places are living in cars or renting rooms to be able to, or living a 2-hour commute outside of the district to come in school. So there are significant free market concerns that are going to impact Madison, and we as a governing agency, we can do something about the lack of affordable housing, because the lack of it will impact our school, our ability to run a school district and have our kids and staff do what we need to do to increase our achievement levels. So that is a big picture idea that has to be considered when we do this type of stuff. The other thing more immediate that I'm kind of alarmed about hearing is the impact of the air in our pools are making kids sick as we speak.
Yeah, I was too.
That is something that we shouldn't wait till discuss to 2 years from now doing a referendum. That really needs to be looked at, and I'd like to hear better on that. That should be a priority, not because we have such extraordinary swim teams, which we do. We just, yearly, we seem to win state all the time, and have record breakers and all this kind of stuff. But the kids are getting sick, not just because it might be even unrelated general during the Phi-Ed classes that people are in there to do swimming, and then that happens, it might leak throughout the whole school. So the air quality issue should really be addressed as soon as possible. So that I'm confident you'll take care of, but can you respond to my first statements about using current land and perhaps gathering the information we need? We need zoning rules.
Hey Dean, can I actually can we pause on that one and just I want to make sure these guys get feedback on the proposals here,
well,
and then come back to it at
already.
the end. Mary hasn't spoken yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I don't know if you want to or not, but
yeah, I mean, I know we have other things on the agenda tonight, and so I understand the idea is to get specific feedback where there is, and then get a general direction of the board so these can move forward. Is that the feedback we're...
Correct. You're asking us to give? Yep. Okay, then I will keep it short and focused on that. And I want to first thank you, all of the people who put in a lot of work on this. I think this is really good work. I would agree with a lot of the points that Kate made, that this is important work. This is who we are as a school district. Who we are, how we support our students, how we support our staff and our families, the role we play in the community. I will not make a vote until the dollars, right? And so I think the next stage is, but I would certainly consider the medium level. And if we do have the tax base that can support this without undue burden on the taxpayers, I would look at a higher level than that. But I do think we also have to look at long-term the other facility needs that we have outside of our high schools. But I agree, this is a time in which the Madison tax base has been growing. I do not believe, though, we can expect that it will continue at this pace, but I really think that we should be designating funds that are coming from an increased building base to invest in our buildings, because that will slow, and instead of putting it all in operating expenses that we won't sustain once the building, the new construction slows down in Madison, I think it makes sense to put substantial amounts of funds, if we can afford it, in our facilities. So I look forward to seeing the work move ahead, and look forward to looking at the financial impacts.
Just real quick, I think I said some of this is that number one, that without seeing the financials, it's really hard to prioritize. Where I stand here is that I think that, and the financials would have to include at least what the things like air quality and basic ones for the other 32 school buildings are, to say what level of the high school. I doubt it would reach the bronze, because I would assume that those would be tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars also combined. Beyond that, I also think that perhaps exploring an approach where we are able to take care of that in all of our schools over the course of a schedule, and we talked about staggered referenda and things like that in the past, and also pick and have the community pick one or 2 or 3 per attendance area or whatever, what I think Chad called the juicy something. What did you call it? What was that phrase? I just remember the word juicy.
Yeah.
But you know, but
Yeah,
those
just
ones
more
where
exciting and innovative.
Yeah, the ones where, you know, a new art swing is what this community's preference is. And because we can't do a new art swing, a new athletic swing, new stadiums at all. I mean, I don't think our taxpayers can stand that. So I think that the idea of, you know, in creative ways, having, you know, build the base, have the bread, and, you know, and let everybody pick, you know, one cherry to put on top, kind of thing. I financially and being responsible, that's I would like to see some kind of thing around that. So that's where I come from on it.
Oh, that's, I think, very helpful. Yeah.
Where I come from is this. I'm more of a bronze level person, and I know facilities need updated. Here's my reason on why I'm probably a bronze level. I need to make sure we can pay our teachers and make sure we can do COLA first. I have to make sure that we can meet those requirements. I'm not saying schools are unimportant, but one big thing is the air conditioning, one, and the air quality, because the air quality is going to get a suit. And I really, really, really know that the EPA is very expensive to fix. Those fines are enormous. But number two, that I keep hearing from parents, I keep hearing from staff, I have 4 windows open, 3 fans, the air conditioning going, and I've had 2 kids almost fainted. That's not good. So that's why I'm where I'm at.
I mean, TJ, I really appreciate your idea about having communities engage per attendance area to kind of select the high value, bigger ticket items. I mean, I think the best long-term way to protect our teacher salaries is to keep our enrollment high. And the way we keep our enrollment high is make nobody want to choose a school other than one of our 4 comprehensive high schools. So, or alternative, I mean, we'll get there, right? But like, and we can do that. We have the right resources from a district. We have the right staff from a district. We have better offerings from an instructional perspective and more diverse and more interesting because we're bigger and we can, and we're right next to UW and we're right next to MATC. We have this amazing suite of human capital resources, and our facilities just don't support us doing as badass things as we could be doing with them, right? Like, it's a lost opportunity. So, I mean, I think from the long term, that's the best way to sustain our human capital people and take care of them also. So, look, that's maybe just, it sounds like maybe there's a bit of a process there. There's some delicate, here's my summary of this, some delicate appetite for some of the bigger projects, but overall caution and desire to engage the community on where we really want to do the bigger. Is that a fair summary, or Gloria, you look like you?
Yeah, I just want to add, you know, as part of the engagement is doing a equity analysis around that process. Bigger picture, but then also within each school itself. So we're capturing, you know, a racial component and a diverse, you know, it really is an intentional process of getting the diverse voices. And you know, I'm really in the middle there, silver, you know, I think is where I'm at on that. I mean, without seeing the numbers, I'd want to see the numbers.
Okay, let's come back to Dean's housing comment. Now, thank you, Dean, for letting us kind of, I just wanted to make sure you guys had.
I don't think any of us are in a position to pick a color yet. This is just the beginning of what we got. We don't have the numbers. We don't have a process laid out. This is the first introductory. It's quite well done. But I'm not going to decide tonight which one of these I'm going to land on yet. Who here doesn't want the gold stuff? I do. Right. I want even more. But I don't know if we can get that yet. But
I want to aim for that.
You know, so let's don't really paint ourselves into a corner already by choosing one of these now, when there's so much more information for us to get yet. So adding on to your plan here. Part of the numbers we could look at is if we put some buildings on land that we got, eventually they'll be cost neutral. The income we generate from these things would pay the loan.
Chad, did you
for it? So Plus, the other thing that we need to consider in the facilities plan is, I noticed today, or last week's year report update about how you're spending a lot of time this week raising money for the new Madison College STEM program. Well, this is, I can't think of anything better than to go start raising money for 2 years out around getting a new art center at West or wherever else we want to put it. We could raise some money to help offset some of this cost by doing a very aggressive fundraising inclusion in our grant writing process and also in our own community. There's a lot of money in this city that I think they would want to help. So
I agree.
I kind of laid out some additional things to consider in your thinking as to how you can do the plan, and also in yours about fundraising and your team to do that. And board members is always can be used to close fundraising hits, you know. So maybe not so much me, but others here can go do that. Some, you know.
Yeah,
it's only $200 million.
Well, you know, sometimes, you know, a guy like me showing up is different than someone like you guys showing up.
Depends on who it is.
What else do you guys need from us
there's
for feedback?
opportunities here to decrease the amounts that we need to go for, and until we really get put all this plan together and see where all the money lays out, I'm not going to commit to one of these yet. I would like us to go for as much as we can and get the best deal we can, and then we decide if it's doable or not. But right now, this is a very good introduction by the team here, and I'm hoping that what you heard here, we can think a little bigger.
I think we have what we need, Kate. Okay. I mean, we mainly wanted to know if we could go forward. I'm hearing absolutely yes, and we wanted to make sure there weren't any hard limits, right? If the board said, no, don't go beyond the bronze level, we needed to know that now. We're sensitive to your comment, TJ, about kind of over-promising or getting the community excited about things that we might not be able to follow through on. So we'll develop a way of working and a protocol to make sure that we don't do that. And to your early point about the more juicy or exciting topics, we're very curious about what each school and their community will say about the things that matter to them most. And that will help shape the proposal in the end. And agreed, we need the financials. We didn't expect that the board would be able to land necessarily on any level now, but I really appreciate
just
the
wanted
push.
to get, I didn't want to lead you guys, you know, astray.
Yeah.
So
no, we've got it. I think we're good to go,
Yeah,
and we'll
thank you.
come back.
It's exciting.
Yeah,
it's really exciting.
It's really exciting. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right, we got like 2 more minutes on facilities, and then
quick.
Yeah,
don't
2 minutes. Got it. So, all right. In the spirit of kind of short-term planning in support of long-term facility goals, at the end of this month, the board is going to be asked to give approval to release the already budgeted funds of $2 million to purchase 8 acres on the far west side from the Dome family. For those who are on the board, most everyone, back in December of 2017, the board did approve an offer to purchase this particular land, and the board directed us to go back and do some more due diligence. So we have done that. Kind of multiple phases of work have been happening since December 2017. One, Chad and his team have been working very closely with our realtor to confirm for you that the price in front of us for this land is in fact below market. And 2, we have looked at the available land in and around the development of the Acacia Ridge subdivision to ensure there are not currently any more plots of land that would be better situated, better suited. And we've looked at kind of future land that might open up. And at this point, we're not seeing, along with our realtor, any land that would be of a better purchase than at this, what we have in front of us at this particular period of time. This 8 acres is next to a city park. It has no high voltage, power lines going through it. It has ability to have 2 entrances, which is very important for kind of bus drop-off pickup. And it's not on a main road. We do know that it's close to Olson. We do recognize that. Unfortunately, there aren't any other kind of options available to us right now. One other piece of work that we did do that I'm going to hand it over to Andrew in just a second is we did a lot of work around the capacity that we wanted to make sure we answered for the board, both of Olson itself and then looking at boundaries of what would happen if Stevens Fault, can we pick up the capacity in those schools. So Andrew will answer those questions for you. But mostly before I do that, I want to make sure you all realize you are not being asked to build a new elementary school at the end of this month. You are being asked to purchase a tool for us to hold on to in not that far distance of a future. We'll probably be having this conversation in 4 or 5 years about what we want to do and if we want to build for about 6 or 7 years. So this vote is about putting a tool in our hands so that we have something to problem solve for the future. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the biggest question that we heard around capacity issues was, is Olson actually going to be crowded? And if we built this school, would then Olson become too small? So we've done some analysis and looked at possible boundary changes that really are focused on the areas that have yet to be developed. So we're disturbing as few families as possible. And within about 6 years, certainly 7, 8, Olson would reach its current capacity. So as the rooms are currently configured, if you looked at using every possible allowable space in Olson, because of all the development that could happen out here without a new construction or big changes, you'd hit maximum capacity in another 5. So you're looking somewhere 10, 12, 14 years. So building a site on this property, or building a school on this site rather, you would end up with a school of about 450 students, and Olson would still be a viable school, around about 600 and some. So yeah, it's both schools would be viable options in the future.
All right. So this is our one opportunity to discuss this prior to our vote, correct? So, yeah.
What are the restrictions on the land purchase for resale?
So we cannot sell the land within 4 years. That's built in the offer to purchase. That has to do with the city planning and agreements with the developer. After 4 years, Viridian has the first right to purchase, which, to all reasonable accounts through our discussion, they'd be more than happy to take it back and build a couple more houses and develop a couple more kids on that land for us. It's after 10 years then that Viridian, if Viridian could decline. In that time period, it's after 10 that there's no ties and we could do what it is that we need.
Right to purchase to match anyone else's offer, or is it tied to a certain repurchase at the...
Can you remember this? To match.
Match an offer. Yeah.
Thanks.
That matters, right?
This is Bill, our real estate attorney.
Good to see you again. Couple of other just kind of comments and questions is that, yeah, we're not obligating to build a school, but we are, we're buying land, and that is an investment and one that's there. On the capacity issues, Olson, and projecting out 10, 12 years is difficult, and there's no question about that, but 3 years ago, Olson had a larger than anticipated kindergarten class, and the future projections went up. Each year since then, the projections, the kindergarten classes have been smaller than projected, and the cohort survivals have been less. And so I think that we're going to be seeing a continued downward trend in the projections, and I think that the 10, 12 years that Andrew talked about is probably closer to 15 if that trend continues, and that's a big if. It's if. So, and I don't know if you want to comment on that, but
yeah, there are a lot of rooftops that can go up in this area. That's going to be the biggest factor.
And we don't know what's going to look like.
Yeah, and what we've seen right now, if you'll remember our Van de Waal report for our projections, a couple of years old, and even in a couple of years, the developments have happened a lot denser and faster than we had anticipated in a couple of years ago. So suffice it to say that it's going to happen at some point. I think timing, it's anybody's guess. But there are certainly developments in this area as well as the east side that we thought were 5 and 10 years out that are occupied today. So there is a lot of variability in the timeline. But we didn't want to make it seem like it was something we wouldn't have to worry about for 20 years. It's certainly something we would have to worry about in the nearer future than that.
I think the kind of a related question is I think we also have to be very cognizant of the demographics of our boundaries and our attendance areas and what they look like and what that looks like. The question is who are we building a new school for, quote, and that's how we'll be asked in the community. And there does appear to be some rental housing in there, but it seems to be primarily single family. And the other developments that you referenced, I haven't looked at the plots on, so I don't have any kind of idea. But as you said, they're denser, which means that there's a possibility that there's more something closer to affordable housing if affordable housing actually exists in Madison.
When these are proposed, there's always anyone of scale really does have some multifamily in it. On the outskirts of town, they tend to be single family. Closer for infill, they tend to be multifamily. But that's a dynamic you could see.
So going forward, I just ask that we be conscious of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mary? Yeah, I had voted against this, the offer to purchase back in December 2017, but I really appreciate the work that has gone into looking at comparables, the market rates, the planning around it, more on the capacities, and so will be happy to support this.
Any other commentary? I mean, I think we're good. I have to say, like, I am a little bit uncomfortable. Just this little pocket of land feels like there's some other solutions given some of our ideas on elementary areas, et cetera. Orchard Ridge is a piece of that as well from a capacity perspective, not just Olson. And so, maybe keying off of TJ's point on like who are we building a new school for, I just wonder if there isn't a slightly different solution, understanding that it would require boundary changes that are difficult and complicated to kind of facilitate. So I think from having an option perspective, this is a fine thing to do before we go further. I'd love to see how, and this goes back to the long-range facility planning, I'd love to see your thinking on that kind of corner of Madison and how we might think about it differently.
I think, Dean, building affordable housing on our land is the way to do it, like Dean said.
Okay, we have a whole nother discussion. So thank you, Chad. Thank you to everybody. Thank you, Mike, for being here.
Next.
That's 1 to 4. I have to get the
We
other
should
two.
talk about it.
No, I'm not going to get
Okay,
that.
so the second piece of this discussion is on budget. Thanks, Mike. All right, so Kelly, take it away.
And Lisa.
Yeah, thank you.
My partner and friend.
Oh, they have their boxes with them. We didn't ask for the boxes.
Come on, man.
I am very ready.
Okay. Tonight we are here.
Thank you, Mike. We'll miss you. Sorry, but that was classic.
Yeah. It's nice to have Mike here. Tonight we are here to kick off our 2019-2020 budget process. We've had a great couple months, both over the summer and in November and December, doing some preliminary work around the budget. We've had some time to have some good conversations about allocation and compensation, so we'll focus a little bit more on some of the strategic equity projects since we haven't been able to have a really comprehensive conversation on that yet. And then we'll overview our budget goals, guiding principles, and our overall core assumptions built into the budget process before we start our formal planning process moving forward. Okay? All right. Right on from that. So in front of you is a slide those of you who've been on the board for a while have seen before. This is our budget planning approach. We start with our goals and principles, which we'll do in just a minute. We'll deep dive into our revenue because it's important that everyone make sure we understand our assumptions on the revenue side before we start talking about how to spend it. And then typically what we do is move into staffing and all those other bullets there further on in the year. Tonight is a little bit different. So based on board member feedback, we're trying something new. And that is to review the overall core assumptions in the budget together as a package. So you can look at them together to see how the various components move in different parts depending on what assumptions you build. So it's a little new this year, but let's see how it goes and if it's something we want to continue for the future. Every good budget process starts off by making sure that we put front and center our missions, our values, and our goals. Our mission is that every school will be a thriving school that prepares every student to graduate from high school, college, career, and community ready. We get there by holding our values front and center: belonging, excellence, creativity, racial equity, social justice, voice, and focus. And together with that, we hope to accomplish 3 goals: our academic goals, our culture and climate goals, and our new goal 3 is that our African American students excel in school. So putting these strategic framework, values, and goals at the forefront, the hope is we can stay focused on what matters most to all of us. Then we start to get more focused. What are our actual goals for this particular year's budget process? And we drafted these based on feedback from the board over the last 4 months, really. So we start off with equitable use of resources to support students with the highest needs, particularly those of special education. Reducing the number of sections above maximum and below maximum in alignment with the class policy we're hearing is important to the board. 3 is really new for this year. We passed an equity policy, and one of our goals is to figure out how to utilize that equity policy in line with decision making for really the first time through our budget process. So we'll be working through that between now and June. 4, to provide total compensation that's going to be steps plus base wage to employees equal to or greater than COLA. Right now, COLA is at 2.42. That range is going to go up to anywhere between 2.46 in all the estimates. So we're in a pretty tight range of knowing where we would be for that number, but it's not official yet. And then last, invest in a focused set of priorities aimed at persistent needs. So if those are our goals, we get there through some guiding principles. Again, putting the strategic framework goals first and foremost, maintaining a multi-year long-range perspective, both on the revenue, finding revenue. Dean came up with an example for us today, and how we use it. Maximizing efficiencies in order to ensure stability in our schools, and to build on previous practices that we see are showing promise for our kids in the future. So those are the draft goals and draft guiding principles. Kate, I can pause here for board feedback if there's anything we can't live with or without, or I can keep going.
Keep going if you guys are okay. I'd love to.
I actually think it's really important to pause here, Kate, if that's okay. If the board is in agreement with these goals and guiding principles, that's fine, or if you want to tackle it later.
Let me raise it at the end. I think it's important to get some of the facts out before we come back to this, and we can. I'll force everyone to answer just like I did before.
Yeah, let me chime in on this then as part of the presentation.
Sure.
I'm gonna pretend I'm sitting in Kelly's seat for a minute. I think that when you guys come back to this discussion, it's very important for a few different reasons. One is this is the official budget launch for this year. I want to make sure that the board is taking advantage of the fact that we have one more year of the referendum to exceed revenue limits that was passed by the voters to help us not have to cut, right? So that we would not be in a budget crisis. And I want, not that we would do this, but I want to make sure that we don't unintentionally orchestrate a budget crisis where we don't have one, right? We went to the voters for a reason, which brings me to my second point. I think the term stability is used in the guiding principles. We have a new governor and administration, which gives me great hope for the future of revenue, but there are a lot of unknowns. We don't know exactly where this is going to end up yet. We also, I just need to name it, we're going to have a board that's changing significantly this year, with Dean and James not running, and a third contested seat. this board is going to change a lot. The people who are around the table today are going to be a different group of people by the time you vote on this budget in June. And I say that all because I want to make sure that we're making decisions that I want us to make decisions that help forward our shared agenda without creating instability that we don't need to create, right? I think this is a really important transition year, and staying focused and being steady is going to be really important. So those are my comments.
If we want to pause here, we can.
Yeah, I think we're pausing here.
Okay.
I mean, we've already paused, and it's to be very, very brief, is that I think that I don't know whether this is a goal or a principle, but I think that something along the lines of reallocate from diminished priorities and less than successful programs. I mean, I think that that having those choices before the board as this process goes forward, that and explicitly calling them out as that is important. And I don't know if it's a goal or a priority. It could be either, but I think that I think other than that the list is strong and good. Maybe there's so, but that's.
Thank you. That helps.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll chime in at the end. Keep going.
All right, I'm gonna keep marching. You've seen the timeline slide before, so I won't spend too much time in here. We're obviously kicking it off and heading towards April, where we release the preliminary budget. This picture you've also seen before. It's meant to illustrate the fact that our revenues must meet our expenses by the time we hit the June timeframe. So we're aiming to hit the green line amongst that chart, and some of the decisions and discussions we have going forward are aimed at exactly at that. So we'll start with the revenue. This is a graph of our student enrollment. Students in seats are also called butts in seats in our side of the world. We're down about 200 kids over the trajectory of the last few years, and these are the numbers that drive our allocation process. We also have our membership numbers. DPI gives us our revenue on a 3-year rolling average for membership. This is how our revenue is driven. We are considered a slightly declining enrollment district, and that does matter quite a bit as it relates to how our revenue is calculated, because it generates a slightly different formula. Okay. So building our 3-year average into the revenue forecast, we also have to make a couple assumptions. We're not likely going to get our budget from the state until June. We're just working on that assumption. If it comes earlier than that, it'll be great. But in the meantime, we're going to have to build these in. So around the per pupil categorical aid, this was a tool that Governor Walker used for funding schools. The current law states negative $24 per pupil. We don't think that is likely to happen. We also don't think the new administration is likely to invest too much in this old tool. So we're anticipating a 0 budget. On the revenue limit authority, our current governor has proposed, when he was at DPI, $200 pupil increase. We don't know how that will turn out. After a lot of conversations with DPI and surrounding school districts, just about everyone around us, and we would agree, around the $100 per pupil mark for budgeting purposes. If this comes in higher in June and July, that'll give us a lot more flexibility around compensation or other discussions that the board is having at the time. But right now, our safest bet is to plan for $100 per pupil. No one will want to be cutting in the months before school starts if we were to overestimate that number. And then third, and very significantly, we have our local community to thank for our referendum authority of $8 million this year. Jen just alluded to the fact that this is the last year of that funding. When you add those estimates together, that gives us a $10.7 million revenue limit. What we do also have to include here is our expenditures for the increase in the current 2X charter programs that we have, along with the increase in the voucher programs. This is estimated to be at $1 million in addition from what we spent last year, which brings our overall new revenue to $9.7 million. Our current budget assumptions assume that we are going to spend 100% of the $9.7 million. In the past few years, we've held back with, some rollover in order to manage the levy. If we spend the $9.7 million, we are looking at a 5.5 to a 7% levy increase. That is much higher than this board is typically comfortable with. I understand that. We do anticipate, as Mary mentioned earlier too, our property valuation growth staying up pretty high again this year. We have 2 more TIDs coming off for at least this year. I don't know if that will hold for years after this. So we think we can come up with a goal of keeping the mill rate at 0 while using the $9.7 million. And in total, that's kind of my package recommendation around our budget assumptions for revenue. Questions, concerns, or I'll keep moving. Yep, you got it, Kate. All right. So I mentioned we haven't been able to have a lot of conversations around the strategic equity projects, but the board has had a number of feedback throughout the last 4 months. And so what we're hearing from the board is that our strategic equity projects should be responsive to student and staff needs, the feedback we've received, focused on a few but high leverage investments, and be able to provide accelerated funding over the next 3 years, with a few of these areas potentially being in the first year of that multi-year spending. Goals around improving school climate and culture and student engagement and what we're hearing from the board. And Lisa's going to take over now to talk a little bit about the exact projects we're hearing from you and we have in mind.
Yeah, let me take a try at this to just give some detail around each of these priority areas. So this list really represents areas of potential focused investment in areas of greatest need. And some of these we've discussed pretty recently, like even just the last week or two. So I'm just going to do a high-level summary and letting you know that the costing around this, about 1.5 to 3 million, is what really the package is of these investments. So the first bullet represents our investment in mental health supports, which we know is a priority of the board and a priority of our staff. Our staff have told us that this should be a priority investment, so you will see that listed here. This could include expansion of behavioral health in schools. We've talked about that a little bit, but it might also include continued differentiated investments. So investments in bounce back at the elementary level and some different kinds of investments at high school around integrated support models at the high school level. The second bullet, we just talked about this as a reminder, and this represents a significant investment in special education funding and staffing in the district. And that would be actually accomplished by repurposing in the workbooks and building it in. So you will see this actually in the next couple slides show up on the staffing side of the equation. I won't go into detail on that right now because we need to come back to it when we actually have projected enrollments and we actually know what student needs are, and when we will be able then to provide you with an update on the pilot process in one attendance area. So mental health supports, an investment in special education and student services staffing. The third bullet is funding that's represented to support expansion or creation of seats, and that will come based on some recommendations from our Office of Youth Reengagement. They will provide an update to us in March, so we'll hear a little bit more about that then. That also represents, bullet 3, our commitment to the Early College STEM Academy for another cohort of 100 students going through in our multiple year plan to provide access for students who have traditionally not been able to access this type of programming. And then the fourth bullet is this notion of more supportive and more differentiated training for school staff. So when we say universal practices, what we mean there is restorative practices, really helping schools and school communities figure out what it is that is best for their school around restorative practices, and also some recommendations that are coming out of the BEP Ad Hoc Committee. That's where those equity project funding sources would be. And then finally, increases in community schools, that progression of expansion that we've talked about, that Nichelle has talked about in the past, that provide wraparound services and supports for schools and communities. So this slide basically gives an update in these 5 areas, a focused way of allocating resources around strategic equity projects that we have sort of built into the package moving forward.
So This is an illustrative slide. It's just simply meant to say that the more revenue we can make available in the budget process, the more we can fund out of our priority projects. So as we're looking at the various components, weighing out some of these very important projects, such as mental health, is part of the consideration that we have moving forward. So somewhere between $2 and $3 million would obviously give us a much greater investment in the the equity projects that we have in front of us today.
Let's pause here
Yeah.
just to get feedback on this piece. Nikki, you want to go first?
Sure. One, thank you on the mental health. We've been saying it, I know Mary has been saying it quite a bit. I know Kate has been saying it. I know I've been saying it. I think we all have. And I think that's an excellent, thank you for listening to us on that. Only comment I have is on the special ed piece, is on the pilot. I know this is not a popular opinion, but I'm going to ask it anyway, if we could have a vote on the whole pilot of the changing of the funding formula.
On the ERS piece?
On the ERS piece.
Okay.
And that's all I have to say.
All right. Dean, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I just assumed there was always going to be a vote on that.
Was not.
I don't know if it was or not, but, well, okay. As far as accepting that report recommendation verbatim or not, I think we've said enough about that. Just the $1.5 to $3 million initial investment, I think that means over and above what's already there. Am I right?
From current year base funding?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, so just to be clear on that, there's already a significant amount of funds in these areas, but this is an additional potentially $3 million increase in these areas.
Right, an investment in these areas.
Right.
Thank you, Dean.
Yeah, so that should be clear. So the whether or not the ERS recommendations are taken across the board or not, this doesn't give us the actual numbers. It just says where we're going to put the additional attention. So the numbers of additional staff isn't here yet, but we'll see
right.
that. Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify that, projections come in soon, right? Friday or something?
Right.
Right, and we build the workbook based on those projections. This question that Nikki's asking about voting on the ERS recommendations,
And the
I think
funding formula.
it just puzzles me a little bit because we have multiple formulas that we use for allocation of ELL positions. I mean, there's a variety of formulas that we use for different things, and it would just be so unusual to vote on a single formula. We took your feedback at the last meeting. We're definitely coming back to you, and we're working on those weights and that approach. And we'll talk about this more at our next meeting when we have the projections and we know more about what would get built into the workbook. But I think, oh God, what was I going to say? Oh, the whole purpose of the pilot is to make sure that we get the formula right? We got to try it out, monitor it closely, learn about how it works, right, in a group of schools before expanding, or so that we can change and make sure that the formula is close to as right as possible. So we wouldn't want to forward something to vote on because we haven't learned enough about how the formula should work across the district. So we can talk more about that later.
Yeah, quickly respond and then TJ's in late.
The reason why I want that is because it's such a significant change on funding. And I understand the weighted, but I just feel that that's important for people to say this is why the board agrees, disagrees, but that's my personal opinion. I'm just saying that's what I would request. That doesn't mean I'm fighting lock, stock, and barrel. It means that's just my request on the issue.
I understand that, Nikki.
All right.
I just know it will be a significant increase in special ed investments.
I think that if we treat the ERS pilot like we've treated strategic priorities in the past and had votes on them, whether this is a pilot we want to invest in, would be kind of, would cover it both of it. And I also think that if in the future, if we do a pilot, after we do it, if we do make a change to how we allocate special education, that would be an appropriate place also to have a vote. I mean, what's the purpose of it? So, because I don't think there will, I think if we were to do a pilot, I think that it would yield very ambiguous results, and I think that it would be appropriate to have a vote at that time. So, when I look at these priorities, I think the behavioral health in schools would be my number one, and I would like to see our expansion occur at the level of our capacity, or our partner's capacity. And I'm not quite sure, I think it's our partner's capacity probably, which at this point is more,
TJ,
more limiting.
Capacity or need?
Capacity. Trouble finding practitioners, trouble finding partners who will find the practitioners. No, the need, no. The need is something different. And I think that but we've heard multiple times that there's a difficulty finding practitioners, and that our partners, that, we had to expand from one partner to two partners just for that very reason, for that and related reasons last year. I asked Armando to stay, actually, so that we could have this discussion, but he wanted to go home to his family. I don't understand it. But anyway, but that's what I mean. So it's our partner's capacity.
Yeah, thanks.
Second is that, as I said, I think that the pilot on the ERS formula, I can't see it yielding anything really clear. And to me, that means that it's not worth doing. It's kind of tinkering and tweaking. I don't think we're going to see significant different outcomes, or whether they be in terms of staff morale, parent satisfaction, student learning. I just don't see. I don't see much coming from it. It's based on our current. Essentially, what I see is the formula is based on our current IEP minutes, rounded up. That's as it was explained. Unfortunately, there was no written explanation given us about how the formula was arrived at, so I have to go from my memory of what was spoken. But that's what I remember. We were given a bunch of numbers without an explanation in a written form. So if my impression is wrong about where it was derived from, I'd welcome an explanation that we could all share.
We certainly can clarify that for you, TJ. I thought we prepared that information, but we'll get it to you.
And
as well as on
let me
the
just
details
continue
of
with this, is that I think that on the expanding and I would support, and I generally do support expanded special education staffing, and I still think that's a need. The last thing is that I think that, well, two things. Number one is I think that expanding training, as per the ad hoc, that we should really investigate reallocation from our other professional development funding sources and our other professional development time, and not add some new training, but rather replace an old training. And I mean, I think that's both financially and in terms of our staff's time, that's it. Last, I think that I would like to see, I would really like to see what expanding the alternative seats means. There's definitely a need there.
Yeah.
And so I'd really like to see that.
Mary. Yeah, I'm just going to go down the list as well. So obviously big supporter of the mental health supports, and as fast as we can expand that. I'm wonder about other options, given that the capacity limitations on our partners. I do not know a lot about this, but is there capacity that could help support these things in other ways, whether it's school psychologists, social workers, or others that can help support the behavioral mental health needs that may not be within that same model? Because if we're limited by our partners or being able to source some of these services, are there other services that could, maybe not the ideal, but could help address some of those issues? Special education staffing, I'm not, I think that we should always look at continually improving and seeing how we can do better. I think that it's whether we're getting enough resources into the special ed area. Then there's the actual allocation, and I'm all for looking at other ways of doing it and piloting other ways, but I also think from some of the things we've heard, there may be a need just for the additional
resources gets back to our high needs students in the mental health and behavioral supports. I'm very much interested, just like TJ, with the options on alternative, by saying that these are being based on recommendations from the Office of Youth Reengagement. Does that limit what type of seats those are going to be? Is that office actually part of our current alternative programs and expanding seats there? Is that going to include possible expansion of seats in our existing? Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, I wanted to too, thank you.
Yeah, and training for school staff, I think there's always, anytime we take our staff out of the classrooms, it's troublesome. So if it can substitute for other trainings, but I think that these things are important, and I think we should continue to do that. I will, on community schools, I'm still, jury's out for me on how impactful it is. It's certainly something that feels good, but I really don't know. So I'll be interested in us continuing that pilot, but constantly assessing. My feeling is that even at $3 million, this feels light. We're talking about 50 schools. 50 schools, if my math is right, is $60,000 a school. You take away the alternatives, and you're down to less than $50,000 a school. I can't believe that that's actually going to have a significant impact on the types of issues that we have been hearing about and seeing. So I would be pushing for at least the higher end, certainly at $1.5 million, 50 schools. I don't see how we can say we're getting serious about this at that rate. Or having in not only what we say, what will be the outcomes.
And just to clarify for you guys, that $3 million on the max, does that include the special ed, or is that separate?
That is separate to the extent that we can fund it.
Okay.
Based on other decisions.
Okay.
It's intended to be separate.
Got it.
There's also built into the slides moving forward just kind of a goal of a $2 million repurposing from central office. We always do that as our ways of working.
Right.
That way of working stands. We would do that. And so plugged into any scenario would be kind of that goal. So that $2 million is primarily what ends up funding these equity projects.
Right. So maybe just to close this section out, I agree with everything that Mary just said, and TJ as well. I think kind of the one piece, maybe for me personally at least, we just made a major investment in community schools. I'd probably let that one sit for a year and really focus this year around mental health supports, alternatives, and special education. My one question that I didn't see that I just wanted to raise was around early education. I know we've kind of, it feels like every year we say next year. Yeah. And so before we get too late in the budget process and we say that again, I wanted to ask that question around how we're committing to potential. We've talked about a pilot of a full day 4K. We've talked about these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's yours, Lisa.
I think the answer is not there, but.
It was actually interesting that you mentioned that about early education. I was talking with Colleen and Barbie today a little bit about it, and I think that we may have some more information to bring back to you in the next couple of months around that. She's still gathering information right now. And looking at sort of risk analysis of where that might happen, what that cost might be, and what implications might happen in the future as we move forward with the model.
That's just the one question that I would have in terms of another high priority area that potentially to find kind of room in the budget for. Gloria, did you have any?
So, I mean, we had this discussion.
Dean, would you grab me one too?
We had this discussion just the meeting before, the Behavior Ad Hoc Committee. when we talked about, mental health supports, increasing mental health support, special education, and we also heard from the Office of Youth and Re-Engagement. But we had the conversation with the focus on directing those funds and additional resources towards those who are who need the intense support. And so when we talk more broadly, right, I think we have to consider the funding amount, right? What are we trying to accomplish here? I think with what you will hear from the behavior, and Kate, you've been part of these discussions, is it's going to be focused on these, the number of kids, right, in our schools who really need intense support, and that is going to reflect on the recommendation of funding. So in the broad scheme of things, right, when we're talking about $3 million, I don't know, right? If we're talking about the whole entire district, right, that number seems too low. But when we're talking specifically on directing these resources to those individuals who are causing the behavior issues in our schools, it might not be as, right? And we did talk about the capacity issue within our community on that, so.
Mary?
Can I ask Lori about that? Because I wasn't at today's meeting, but the last meeting that I was at, I didn't sense that the recommendations were targeted towards that. And I'm trying to recall.
Well, they heard you.
Okay.
And Kate and I have been bringing this up. We've been having those conversations, right?
Yeah.
And so it is trying to get us to start thinking about a very targeted approach, right? When we're talking about special education, mental health supports, that very targeted approach. So that's what sparked our conversation today. I just wanted to mention that, right?
No, it's fair. Yeah. All right, TJ, and then let's keep moving.
I just want to say that full reimbursement for full day 4K is one of the governor's priorities, and I think that it could be wise to wait a year and see if he gets that through, because I think it's also a priority that could find bipartisan support among his priorities, and so. Wait till next year. I'm from Chicago. You used to hear that a lot. But I think that this is a case where there's an actual real potential for state-level change.
Yeah.
And which would really make the financial piece of it work for us. So.
Okay, keep going.
So thank you. Very helpful early conversation. We come back to this conversation in the March timeframe, where we'll have much more specifics for you. So thank you for this really great start on that work.
Staffing in February.
And staffing in February. Yep. So trying to start pulling it all together and what this looks like. So if we have $9.7 million in new revenue, we're looking at pretty much all of that going into our total compensation planning right off the bat. So we have $5.3 million of funding for our STEP schedule already baked in. The board voted on that last month via the handbook. Right now, we have $2.5 million held for our kind of the health care. Negotiations, haven't started yet. We've got a long way to go there, but that's what's holding for the budget now. And we have an open question around base wage. So, pending the decisions the board makes, there's some funding that could be left available for the priority projects. And as I mentioned before, I already have baked into the scenarios you see moving forward about $2 million of central office funding that would be intended to be repurposed. That's a goal. Every year we set a repurposed goal, and that would be the one I recommend for this year. So when we start looking at what base wage strategies look like, we have multiple different outcomes. And just to get you a little bit familiar with the table, the middle column right there where you see the -25, that's on our enrollment adjustment that would happen in the formula regardless of any other decisions we make, simply because our student count is down. So with that in mind, that would not have that much impact on the class size. Any small sections that happened would start to move up to optimum. So if we did that alone, we would be around optimum for the class size. But as you kind of move up the base wage total compensation investment, we have to work harder to balance the budget. So you could be looking at various ranges of staffing adjustments the higher up you go on the base wage. And then any decisions we make around special education, FTE, or student services, FTE, regardless of how you allocate them, would be additional kind of repurposing that we would need to do from the regular ed side of the house over to the special ed side of the house. You could think about it as a Fund 10 to Fund 27 transfer for those particular positions. Again, the harder it becomes to fund, the less unallocated we can hold. So that's that last, second to last column. We traditionally go into the budget process somewhere between 10 and 12 unallocated, kind of irregardless of where we end up landing. Our revenue situation is such that we're going to be much tighter on unallocated, which means it'll be harder for us to problem solve in the August timeframe. So we'll have to all be, working really closely together in August. So again, those class size policy impacts change, which gets us back to those goals and guiding principles, depending on some of the decisions you make around the base wage total compensation.
Can I ask a question? Because Kelly, and could you go back a couple of slides to the one this one? So here we're exceeding the 9.6. We're at 9 to 13 million in increases. We just reviewed a slide that said that it's these high priority investments are 1 to 3 million, and that maybe didn't include additional special ed staffing. So the next slide's about what's needed to fund these different base wage changes. Doesn't take into account at all the special priorities, the $3 million needed there.
So the special priorities is the central office. Cuts help to fund that in particular. So that's, I think, the missing piece maybe to your conversation, Mary.
I guess that's where I'm not convinced that we're saying we can fund all those things on that prior thing that we all just said were really important by $2 million of cuts in the special office. I mean, in the central office. I don't know that we have that much.
Yeah. So
access. I mean.
Yeah. So
I'm not getting that.
Fair enough. So on that point, I did, move a slide just to hear Mary, just to make that point real quick. If I'm on the same page you are. It is true that over the last 5 years, we have cut $17 million in central office.
I think your next page actually explains Mary's question.
I think that answers Mary's.
I think.
Okay.
Slide 20 and 21.
Yeah. Let's keep going, and then we'll.
Okay, I didn't
make sure
mean
that
to. I
you're
just
clear.
like
Make sure
it
you're
seemed
clear.
like we talked one and then.
Yeah. So the slides are.
I found it
The slides are meant to hang together, so let me present them.
Okay,
both
I'll just
together.
wait then.
Okay, so depending on the decisions we make around base wage, that will affect what kind of funding we have available for the priority projects, what funding we can put in for our healthcare assumptions, and then the total staffing adjustments that would need to be made for the whole budget to balance together. So as more base wage goes up, we have to change some of our assumptions around healthcare so that we can reallocate healthcare over to the compensation. It starts to become much more difficult to fund priority actions because at that point, the $2 million that we cut from central office go to fund base wage versus priority actions. And then the total staffing adjustments help to balance the rest of the budget is what ends up happening.
Yeah, and to Kelly's earlier point, $2 million in cuts to central office is built in to this thinking in every scenario. Is that right, Kelly?
That is correct. It's just about where the $2 million
goes.
goes.
It's not to be taken lightly, right? Just because it's on top of every year we're digging into the central office budget again. It's our way of working. We repurpose every year. Yeah, but it's definitely hard to do. But we think we can accomplish it.
That's
$2
right.
million.
Let her just finish. It's just one more page. So there's one more page, and then we can make sure that everybody's clear.
Okay.
Okay. So based on building these assumptions into the budget, the best way to stay in line with the goal of ensuring stability in our schools and multi-year budgeting, thinking forward to next year, what we would build into the budget right now would be the 0.5 compensation for a total comp plan of 2.5%, which would allow us to balance the staff reductions largely on those enrollment adjustments. We would be able to stay well within the class size policy. Still absolutely positively working to negotiate those healthcare all the way down to zero to the extent that we can. Any additional savings that we can push out of that can be discussed with the board for possible reallocation back to compensation. We've done that in the past before. And it allows the $2 million right in the middle there of our goal of the central office reductions to be used to fund equity projects.
And what we're looking for, just to be real clear, is, most of you know this, our beginning budget assumptions, right? So that we're not getting too far into this process and realizing that we've built the wrong assumptions in, knowing that there's flexibility, opportunities to change as the process unfolds. This is just a starting place for budget.
Okay, Nikki.
Quick question. I think we have IDEA reserve money, correct, left? I think that's what it's called. I'm not sure. Or
The
savings
flow-through?
that we get for disability funding every year, correct?
A flow through?
Thank you. Could not think of the word for the
Yeah, no
life
problem.
of me. How much do we have in there, and how could that be used, or could it not?
That's a good question, Nikki. We have been carrying over a fairly significant, a hefty carryover every year to respond to unanticipated needs. And I would say that from this year going into the next year, we will have the smallest carryover in IDEA that we have ever had. Because remember, we went all in on FTE this year. We are also responding around limited term supports for schools. So when we used to really rely on a very hefty carryover, we actually had an obligation, quite honestly, to spend that down to an acceptable limit. But we are probably at that limit, and Nikki, I will have John prepare an answer to that. I don't have that at the tip of my tongue right now. I'm happy to have John prepare an answer to that.
Gloria.
So, I brought up healthcare, last year, and just want to have a conversation about that too, on both sides, on both ends, right? I mean, is there, I would like the opportunity to go and have a conversation and see if we can reduce the cost of healthcare. And then also, how we can look at the different options of having staff pay into healthcare. And I think we talked a little bit about that last year, but
so a point I probably should have made earlier, what we build into the budget at this point with budget assumptions is really just a placeholder. Anything above that placeholder, we would, because these numbers are, in May and June, would need to be funded by employee contribution or other employee plan design work if the numbers were to come in higher. But our intention is absolutely to negotiate down. There are years Mike put 0 in the budget. So our absolute intention is to continue to push on that budget and get as far as we can. It might mean we're going to have to make some plan design to get there. But that is kind of a big next step in our work that the HR team is already planning, gearing up, looking at the data to help build our strategy.
And as a reminder,
I think that's important.
For what it's worth, MTI is a really good partner in negotiations with us. And I know that process is already getting underway.
So the placeholder right now is what?
2.5. Well, it's 2.5 million is the max of that placeholder. Our goal is kind of better suited around 1.2 or 1.8 million.
Yeah.
In order for us to get these other priorities of the district, we would want to be below the 2.5 million.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
philosophically and personally, I think I support a base wage at or very near CPI. If CPI is at 2.42, that was where I would start, and anything below 2.25 would be problematic. I also think that savings should be sought. I support the philosophy of steps and lanes, but if we can find savings through redesign of steps and lanes rather than through a lesser base wage, I would prefer that. The second thing is, regardless of what my philosophy is and my personal beliefs, the impact on morale and cultures of our schools of offering anything less than anything much less than a 2.42 base wage would be negative, and extremely negative, as we saw last year. And yeah, so leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, TJ, you and I philosophically just
we differ,
right? But I also look at actually what's in the paycheck. You know, that's how actually most people look and say, what is the percentage of that my pay increased from last year? And that's the increase in pay. And for me, I completely support seeing our staff's increase in pay, which is steps and base wage, be at COLA. But we changed the salary schedule so that, I agree, last year where you have only half of your staff getting an increase, that they didn't see that increase of a cost of living increase in their paycheck because half of them didn't receive an increase.
And that's changed
But
now.
and that's why I believed it should change. We shouldn't have like 1 year you do, 1 year you don't, just because of where you are. I think there should be a certain amount built into a schedule that is an increase, and then we look at where the budget stands, what the other priorities are, what the funding sources that we have in there, and then what can we do to bring that total between the steps and the base up to a cost of living increase. That is what they should see in their paycheck. So that's what I would like to be able to get to. I think we have to wait like we do every single year to see where all of these come together. I do believe that if we go above that level, we will not be able to make the investments in our alternative programs, in the mental health supports, and I think actually our staff value that. Every times I visit, that is what's affecting their jobs in the classroom every single day, is not being able to get kids the supports that they need above that. So I wanna see where this all comes out as we move forward. But I totally support seeing that our staff see an increase in their salary. That is cost of living, and the more we can hold down health, the better. But I am not going to be behind taking every dime we have and increasing pay above what the cost of living is.
Just to chime
Can
in
I,
on that for a
can I,
moment.
let's keep the conversation
Yeah.
going. I just like to respond personally to both of you. I mean, it's interesting. I think I have a philosophical difference, probably somewhere in the middle. For me, I think, I believe that what we pay our people matters. I don't think we're going to be able to get to the 2.5% CPI. I just don't see it's going to happen. I think we're going to have to be over 1% personally. And I don't know where that sweet spot is. But for me, I think we've got to at least push to a total kind of in 3. That's again based on the facts right now. For me, this table is really clearly laid out. For me, we've got 100 rooms under 15 kids. I don't want to dramatically alter our class size policy. I think it's okay if those rooms have 16 instead of 15. And so for me, like the stability of our staff, the supports from a mental health perspective and from a student services perspective matter more for retention of our staff and for stability of our teams, which matters more for education. So, I mean, the research says like the stability of our teams and how we're supporting our people in buildings is going to matter more than a 16 or a 15 in a room. I'm not saying we need to go to 25 or 30, but for me, I would consider, and maybe it's just for certain grades or for certain schools, but I would consider having +1 on our class size policy, et cetera, in order to balance this out. So for me, that's where I would go to. I recognize that there's somewhere that we got to go to in this table. The other place, and this is maybe just, you know, I noticed on the page previous to this one, it says, you know, healthcare could be up to 10%, which is just unconscionable. I mean, we've been at 0 for the last few years. We're the biggest group in the city. We should have tremendous partnership as well as pull. And so for me, like, this should round to 0. I think that's very viable. I appreciate that this is a tough year, but, and I think it's one of the biggest differentiators for us. In general, I know most of us probably pay in more to our own health cares. I think there's a huge differentiator from a staff perspective. So I guess I'd look at plan design changes to the degree we need to, but I wouldn't have folks pay in more. I think it's a massive differentiator, and we can partner for the long term here, but we cannot be that high on healthcare costs. Yeah.
Okay, just for full transparency, around the 1%, I want to make sure we're managing expectations around class size. So at 1%, we start to tap out the limits of the policy. And per the policy, grades 4 and 5 are 27, 28. So when we run our models with 1% in, you're looking at classes of 27 and 27, 28 at grades 4 and 5.
At our non-AGR schools.
At our or actually no, all schools in 4th grade.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just, for transparency's sake, want to make sure.
No, thank you for pushing. I mean, that I think this is the reason to have this discussion is we've got different sizes for K, for 1 through 2, right? Like, we've got different sizes at each. There is some possibility, and for me, I would like to see the numbers, at least, of what we could generate there from investing into student services or into mental health and adding one person on the class size. I think that might just be me around the table, but for me, that's one of the places that I would look to here.
It's another reason why we're suggesting to the board that you start at 0.5, but look for opportunities to increase it, because depending on where healthcare negotiations come in, depending on where revenue comes in, maybe we'll get more than $100, right, per pupil, and that's your opportunity to get yourself to 1%, maybe more.
Yeah. What other feedback? Imad. Thanks, Dean.
And I think if we're putting an increased responsibility on teachers every year to with regards to training, especially with like the BEP, the ad hoc recommendations, and innovative teaching practices, and using an equity lens and being consistent in practices, and with all of that, I think if we want that to be successful and kind of at full force, like, I fully support the increased salary. That's what I have to say about that.
Any other feedback? Kelly, do you have what you need from us on this?
Not sure that I do.
Yeah, I mean, so you're looking for feedback on these assumptions to work with, right?
Here's
so
where we are in the planning process, right?
On.
We did second Friday counts last Friday, which means we'll have our enrollment projections finalized by this Friday. The very next week, we run these workbooks on this assumption. We finalize them amongst our team, and they go out to schools on February 14th. So that's where we need to be. And if I'm hearing some zone between 0.5 and 1, or 0.5, or something other than that, I really do need to know.
Because that means we build fewer FTE into the workbooks, which could result in layoffs down the line. I just need to play the whole scenario out so that everyone understands why this particular assumption.
And on that
matters.
point, we get HR briefings on retirement notices. We are trending behind in retirement
very important to
notices
know.
this year, which is very important to know. So if we have a low retirement class, we'll find that out about mid-February will be the final numbers.
Yeah.
It will mean there are less positions to move people around, and you could end up in a situation where you're talking about layoffs come this spring. It is possible the higher up you go on this chart that's where we will be. And I had previously said back in December that our goal would be to not do that. Our goal continues to be that, but the higher up you go here, the harder it will be to meet that goal.
Yeah, not to scare people, just to paint a full picture.
You're doing the right thing.
Here's where I'm at. 1, I believe in special ed funding. 2, I don't want to pit teachers against special ed funding and FTEs. I'm not going to do that. I will cut elsewhere. I will cut other things, but I won't do that. That's a personal thing. And 3, I want to be at COLA. And so that's where I stick.
So Nikki, play that out. I mean, what if does that mean we start with a 0.5 here plus?
I say we almost have to. I don't want to be. Last year, what happened is we started at 0.5.
Yep.
And it was too low.
Yep.
And it ended up causing bad faith.
Yep.
I think we almost have to start at 1. I almost think we have to do that. Because otherwise, we end up with a bad faith argument. Here's where I get the savings. I think we need to use our leverage on healthcare. And I think we really can do that to be able to cut the costs.
I think, I am looking at the healthcare. I mean, I think going back and negotiating, reducing the cost of healthcare, and seeing, where we go. I am at the 0.5 right now, and getting, as we move forward, getting some cost. I mean, it's hard for me to go to 0.5 without knowing the healthcare. I really want to see where we can go on healthcare. So I think we should go back on negotiations on that.
TJ?
Coming off a budget where we underspent what we budgeted previously by over $6 million, I have trouble believing that that we can't not do everything, but do damn close to everything that's on this sheet. Clearly, there was $6 million that was budgeted previously that was not necessary. And that has now been converted into hardening of our schools, primarily. And so I'm a little confused, and add $1.2 million that was used to prop up the referendum spending. That's $7 million that had not been previously budgeted. So the sense that we have to start at 0.5 or 0.1 to me isn't real.
So TJ, I can tell you that this model absolutely does not drive a $6 million fund balance.
That's what we were told the year before too, and drove one. So.
Okay.
I mean,
as
I run
a quick
a big budget. Let me just I run a big budget at work, and I end up with empty seats and roles that I would like to fill, and my budget comes in under at the end of the year, and it's not intentional, but it's because some of it's intentional, but some of it's just stuff doesn't happen that you wish happened, and so we have enough staff that $6 million is relatively straightforward actually to come up with in that kind of a way.
No, I'm just saying that it indicates to me that there's flexibility within the budget. It's not a criticism that we came up short. It's that it indicates flexibility there that I'm not seeing in this presentation. So,
I guess I just I wouldn't want to bet on healthcare and where it's going to come in. I mean, the normal healthcare raises for most organizations were like 8% this year, and ours was
3 point. It was just under 4. 4.
Under 4. And what percentage, Kelly, is based into this assumption when you say the 2 and
2.5 is 3.5%.
3.5%.
So it's
So
just
I
under
don't
where we
think that's, I wouldn't bet that it's going to be less. If they can, great, but I certainly wouldn't be basing our assumptions now off of getting less than 3.5%. And so I think we should, personally as a board member, I would just commit that we're going to find a balance, we are going to balance this budget. And we're going to get teachers a fair raise, our staff a fair raise. And that number may be a range based on what your beliefs are, and recognizing that TJ makes a good point. We start to get more sense of where our dollars are maybe coming in underneath. We get a better sense for additional investments that we need to make. But at this point, in January, we're not locking ourselves so far into anything. I think, Kelly, you've come up with some reasonable scenarios here. I would not want tonight to commit to 1 or 0.5 or 1.5 or whatever until at this point. This is 6, and as Jen said at the beginning, you're going to have at least 2 new board members who are going to have to vote on this. So I don't believe that we have to decide tonight on a number or on a scenario. I think what we need to decide is, are we going to, as a board, be committed to coming up with funding some top priorities with a fair wage. And I think all of the board would like to see our staff be able to be as well compensated as they can be. I think the difference is where the priorities going to be. And I guess I certainly wouldn't want to see 4th and 5th grades go above 27, 28. And if there's a little bit that, that can move to get some of those classrooms that are below, I think we should look at those things. But but I don't feel a need tonight to be put in a place where we have to make a commitment exactly where we want to see base wage or where we're going to be on class size. Am I understanding
that's exactly
it
right.
correctly?
It's just
Okay.
a starting
Yep.
point.
Yeah.
From us.
See,
Let's let Dean hasn't said anything.
I'm sorry, Dean, I apologize.
Yeah, let's just, it's getting late, we got another person to deal with. I think Mary well stated, I, though, should want to state loudly and clearly that I'd prefer COLA plus steps. Who doesn't?
Right.
We should say that loudly and clearly, but there's some moving parts here. Let's give the governor a chance to see what he can do. He stated that he wants 2. We're looking at 100. Maybe he's going to land somewhere in between. Who knows? He might get 2. We got moving parts, and if that gives us some room, some flexibility, and yeah, there's stuff that at the end of the year will be left over. That's a risk we don't know. We can't say it's going to be 6 million, but there'll be something left over in there, just as your example and others know. So we got room. We can take some risks, and but loudly and real clear, COLA plus steps is where all of us would like to end up.
No, Dean,
Hopefully we'll
don't
get there.
don't speak for
That's where I'd like to be, to give everybody what I feel they deserve. That's where I'd like to be.
Yeah.
But there's moving parts, and we're not
Lisa.
done. We'll find out.
Yeah, Lisa.
Can I just add one thing? It's not stated here, but I feel like with all the work that we did, the priority slide and the priority investments were the non-class size sort of priorities that were listed there. But I do know, after working with all of you last year, that the priority work was also around class size. We spent a lot of time on the class size policy, and I do want to acknowledge that although it's not on the strategic priority slide, I do know that as a board, you have a value and a priority around class size. And I would, I've been doing these workbooks for 6 years and looking at them and doing it. TJ, you know this because I've talked to you about this, the logic in putting it in. And I, at the risk of stating this, I don't think the intent was every class maxed out at the max of that class size. When we put that together, we put it out thoughtfully around optimal and minimums and maximums, and just want to be sure that we still acknowledge, or we still state that that is a priority, even though it's not on the slide. It is a priority way of working that we have with our schools. And certainly staff and teacher morale also focuses on how many little ones are in those classrooms every single day. And we want to get those schools set up right from the beginning and minimize any kind of disruption as the year goes on. So I just needed to be fair. I am a school person at heart, and I just wanted to be sure that you heard that from my voice.
I just much appreciated, Lisa, and I want to add that little ones and also the big ones in the high school.
Yeah.
That's
right.
I think that's it.
I'm an elementary person.
I know you are. That's why I had to add it.
Yeah.
I'm a high school parent right now.
And I mean, maybe Lisa, just to, and like my commentary earlier, we have a lot of rooms under our minimums, right? A lot. And so that's the area that I think you've heard also from this board, to make sure that we are, just like we're not going over our maximums, we're also not going under our minimums. So, okay. I think you guys have what you need.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have a? We don't have anything else.
Another meeting.
Yeah.
Just another meeting.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Ahmad, your advisory vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Okay, do people want to take a quick 5-minute break?
No.
I have to drive to Chicago tonight.
Needed a
I have
Scott.
to drive to Chicago tonight. Do you guys
What?
really need me? I have to drive to Chicago right now. Do you really need me? Yeah, it sucks.
You can unplug mine too.
Okay, we're going to move right into it. I'm going to call a special Board of Education meeting and open session to order. It will be followed by a closed session. The first and only item on the open session is with regards to the Town of Burke and Town of Middleton polling places. And I will turn it over to Matt.
Sure. So there is an option when there are no other races in the primary, which is coming up in February, that we have the option to close polling places. And so it was suggested, I believe, by the municipalities, and I have Scott McDonald here, who's kind of a content area expert, so we'll bring him up in just a second. But we have the option to close the polling place in the town of Burke and the town of Middleton. Estimate that's about 60 to 70 votes or individuals who are registered MMSD voters. We're able to do this because there are no other elections in the primary and of the small numbers. The requirement of the law is that there can't be more than 10% of the voters in the prior election, which is not the case. And the polling place cannot be located entirely within the school district. And so for both of those criteria are met. So we do have the option, and we've had those municipalities ask if we could consider, and it is up to the school board. It says in statute that that's a school board decision. So I don't know if we want to have Scott come up and speak first, or questions first. What would the board prefer?
I think we're all on board. I have one question for Scott, actually.
Yeah, why don't you come up, Scott?
But I don't think we need a presentation on it. And I guess my one question would be, what's the communication plan with the voters?
That's a great question. So the first thing I tell you is that the two clerks are completely willing to do whatever makes you guys comfortable. They don't want their 3 voters in the town of Middleton to be upset or to not vote. So talking to them, I'll tell you what their plans are, and if you, your feedback is important. The plan in Burke and in Middleton would be to mail those voters, to lid drop those voters, to call them if the phone numbers are available, and to be at the town halls after hours to make sure no one shows up and doesn't know where they should vote. So really from them, it's it's really demoralizing to their poll workers to be there for 16 hours, and really, statistically speaking, probably no one will show up at either location if you have them open. You know, is that the end of the world? But I think also we're very concerned about voter confusion. If you had a vote here today sign out in the town of Middleton Town Hall in the middle of the town would be like, what am I missing? Where am I supposed to be? There could be some lit drops or mailers that go out from the campaigns that maybe aren't exactly targeted. That's, you know, we all are familiar with that. And so you could get some confused voters trying to vote. Actually, the thing I worry the most about is someone saying they're in the MMSD school district, they deserve a ballot, if they're not on the polls, they want a same-day voter registrate, and then you find out you have voters who shouldn't have been voting, which can really screw up an election. So this would really eliminate that, or really minimize that spreading of confusion throughout the townships.
Nikki? Quick question. If we're going to have people there after hours, if we're going to have polling people there for confusion purposes to avoid confusion, then why if we could already do that, then what's the need to close the polling places to begin with? I thought that to protect the vote is the most important thing we're supposed to do, and it's less than a month from the primary.
So I will say, Nikki, was that a question?
No.
Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't moving
No,
on.
you weren't.
I was not in favor of this idea for that particular reason. I think that there's just something about asking people to change where they vote based on efficiency that didn't seem right to me. I went and looked at the voting results for past school board races, and how many, the town of Burke was most concerning to me because it is more than 50 people. And I look back to the year where there was a primary, but nothing of any, not like a mayor's race or something like that would bring people out. So I think probably 2013 might be normal year, and there was one vote from the town of Burke, and so and that those in Middleton, all the wards that would be covered, there were 2 votes. So that to me was different. 50 gets actually, but if that's not, there may be that many register votes. Am I looking at that right, Scott?
It also becomes a privacy issue when you have 2 votes. And so, you know, this is the recommendation of Mary Beth and the clerks. This isn't trying to avoid work or something. This is just what the best practice in this situation from the election professionals.
And I think if there's a strong communications plan, and they understand how seriously the board takes this, I will support it. Okay.
Can people still early vote?
Yes.
In the township?
Yes, in the town hall.
So it's just the day
so
of.
Even if you had like 2 or 3 people voting the odds, they would vote absentee. Especially
Okay.
now that we have expanded hours and multiple locations.
I know I already talked about it.
So
okay, Gwen?
Yeah, so I just wanted to hear from the, I didn't know where to go on this, and because I didn't quite understand, I wanted the opportunity to hear from the professionals and the experts in the area before I made a decision, yes or no, and that's why I really urged for us to have this conversation. And so thank you, Mary, and the rest of the board members who agreed to do that. I mean, the 50, really, I mean, it's huge, school board race. I agree, Mary. But then, I think I trust in, the clerk's office that you guys will do whatever you can to communicate that in ways that we can actually, help support. Right?
Okay, so it sounds like we have, we're going to actually wrap this up and get to a vote. Dean, Kate has a
we
drive
have
to
a legal
Chicago.
responsibility to pass this, so I move that we accept the recommendations of the clerks involved and allow those those
Could we
staffers-
actually make an official
Do you have
motion?
one there?
Yes.
Oh, never mind.
Okay.
I'm ready to make the motion. Do we need to talk anymore?
Okay, then I will ask if there is a motion that the Board of Education close the polling places in the town of Burke and the town of Middleton for the February 19th, 2019 primary school board election pursuant to Wisconsin State Statutes 120.06, sub 9, sub A.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
That passes 5-1.
Thank you for your.
Okay. Okay, so with that, I will move that the Board of Education go into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute, Section 19.85, Sub 1, Sub E, for the purpose of considering negotiation strategies for entering into an intergovernmental agreement where bargaining reasons require a closed session. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Discussion really quickly.
Okay.
I think we should announce the topic of these negotiations and have people know why we're going into closed sessions. And my understanding is
Ahmad,
it
I'm sorry, I
concerns the
didn't ask for
SRO
your
contract.
advisory vote.
That's right.
Yep. And I think that actually open meetings laws requires us to have that much information out there. If it doesn't, I think it's a good practice. So, that's all.
Noted. Okay, so we are in closed session.